You don't have to love me, she whispered through chattering teeth, her eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion. Daniel Wyatt stared at the half-frozen woman he'd just pulled from certain death, and something inside his chest cracked open like ice in spring thaw. Too late, he said, though she couldn't hear him yet. But she would. Before you hear how a Montana blizzard changed 2 broken lives forever, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The wind screamed across the Montana high plains like a wounded animal, driving snow so thick Daniel Wyatt couldn't see his own gloved hands gripping the reins. February 1879 had brought the worst blizzard anyone could remember, and Daniel had lived through 42 winters in this unforgiving country. He should have stayed in the cabin, should have trusted his animals to weather the storm in the barn, should have done a lot of things differently in his life. But Daniel Wyatt had never been good at should-haves. His stallion, a gray named Prophet, snorted and stamped, fighting the bit as wind-driven snow stung his eyes. Daniel leaned forward, pressing his face against Prophet's neck, trying to see anything through the whiteout. The ranch was only half a mile behind them now, but in this storm, it might as well have been in another territory. He'd come out to check the north fence line, worried about the gap he'd noticed 3 days ago. Wolves had been testing his herd, and a broken fence in this weather meant dead cattle come morning, if morning ever came. The temperature had dropped so fast the snow squeaked under Prophet's hooves, that particular sound that meant 20 below, maybe colder. Daniel's beard was already frozen solid, ice crystals forming on his eyebrows and lashes. His fingers ached inside thick leather gloves. This was the kind of cold that killed men, and he knew it. He was turning Prophet back toward home, admitting defeat to the storm, when he saw it. A dark shape in the snow. Wrong shape. Not a boulder, not a fallen tree. Too angular. Daniel squinted, urging Prophet forward. The horse resisted, wanting the barn, wanting warmth, but Daniel pressed his heels in, and the stallion obeyed. 50 feet, 40, 30. It was a wagon. A small homesteader's wagon, the kind dirt-poor families used to cross the plains chasing dreams that usually ended in graves. It was tipped at an angle, one wheel buried in a drift. The canvas cover was shredded, flapping in the wind like broken wings. No horses in the traces, no smoke, no fire, no signs of life. Daniel dismounted, his boots punching through the snow crust. "Hello?" His voice was torn away by the wind. "Anyone here?" Nothing. Just the howl of the storm and the creak of frozen wood. He circled the wagon, checking inside. Empty. Supplies scattered and half buried. A broken chair, some tin plates, a woman's bonnet frozen stiff as iron. Whoever had been traveling in this death trap had either moved on or... Then he saw her. She was maybe 20 feet from the wagon, a dark mound against white snow, already half buried by the storm. Daniel's heart kicked hard against his ribs as he lunged forward, dropping to his knees beside her. A woman. Young, maybe late 20s, wearing a thin coat that wouldn't keep a person warm in October, let alone in this killing cold. "Ma'am?" He pulled off his glove, pressed shaking fingers to her throat. There, faint, so faint he almost missed it. A pulse. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Her lips were blue-white, her skin the color of snow. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair. She'd been out here a while. Too long. Daniel didn't waste time with more questions. He gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and stood, fighting for balance in the wind. She was limp as a rag doll, her head lolling against his chest. He carried her to Prophet, who danced nervously at the unfamiliar burden. "Easy, boy. Easy now." Getting into the saddle with an unconscious woman in his arms tested every bit of Daniel's strength and horsemanship. He managed it somehow, settling her in front of him, wrapping his coat around them both. She was cold. So cold. Like holding a corpse. "Stay with me," he muttered, not sure if he was talking to her or to himself. "Just stay with me." The ride back to the cabin was the longest half-mile of Daniel's life. He couldn't see, could barely breathe in the wind, but Prophet knew the way home. Horses always did. The stallion pushed through drifts that came up to his chest, head down, ears pinned back, following some instinct older than memory. When the dark shape of the cabin finally emerged from the white chaos, Daniel nearly wept with relief. He half fell from the saddle, still holding the woman, and kicked open the cabin door. The inside was cold. He'd let the fire burn down before heading out, but it was shelter, and shelter meant life. He carried her to his bed, the only bed, and laid her down on the thick wool blankets. Her lips were still blue, still not moving. "No, you don't," Daniel said, his voice harsh. "You don't get to die in my house. You hear me?" He worked fast, building up the fire until it roared in the stone hearth, throwing heat and light across the rough cabin interior. Then he turned back to her, started peeling off her wet clothes. The dress was frozen to her skin in places. He had to be careful, working his hunting knife under the fabric, cutting it away. This wasn't about modesty. This was about survival. Leave wet clothes on in this cold, and she'd be dead within the hour. When he had her down to her thin cotton undergarments, he wrapped her in every dry blanket he owned, then added his buffalo robe, the thick hide he usually saved for the worst nights. He rubbed her hands, her feet, trying to bring feeling back into frozen flesh. Her fingers were white as bone. Frostbite, probably. Maybe bad. "Come on," he urged. "Come on, breathe. Get warm. Come on." He heated water, poured it into his only bottle, wrapped it in cloth and pressed it against her chest. He added more wood to the fire. He pulled his chair close to the bed and sat, watching her face for any sign of change. Nothing. An hour passed. Then 2. Outside, the storm howled its rage, but inside the cabin there was only the crack and pop of burning wood and the sound of Daniel's breathing. He watched the woman's chest, counting the shallow rises and falls, terrified each one would be the last. He found himself praying, something he hadn't done since his wife died 7 years ago. Please, please let her live. I don't know who she is or where she came from, but please. Near midnight, or what he guessed was midnight, her eyes fluttered open. Daniel leaned forward so fast he nearly fell out of his chair. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and filled with confusion and terror. She tried to sit up, gasped, fell back against the pillows. "Easy," Daniel said, raising his hands. "You're safe. You're in my cabin. I found you in the snow. You nearly froze to death." She stared at him, breathing hard, her eyes darting around the cabin, taking in the rough log walls, the bearskin rugs, the rifle mounted above the door, the lack of any other people. When her gaze came back to him, there was fear there, raw and unmistakable. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper. "Where am I?" "Wyatt Ranch. About 8 miles south of Gardner. Montana Territory." "Montana." She closed her eyes. "How long? How long were you out there?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. Long enough. Another hour and—" He didn't finish. They both knew. She tried to sit up again, and this time he helped her, piling pillows behind her back. She pulled the blankets up to her chin, suddenly aware of her state of undress. Color, blessed, living color, rose in her cheeks. "Your clothes were frozen," Daniel said quickly. "I had to get them off you or you'd have died. They're drying by the fire. I was trying to save your life, ma'am." She studied him for a long moment, those dark eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Thank you. You want some water? Coffee? I've got some stew I can heat up." "Water, please." He poured a cup from the kettle he kept warm by the fire, brought it to her. Her hand shook so badly he had to help her hold it. She drank in small sips, wincing as if it hurt to swallow. "What's your name?" Daniel asked when she'd finished. She set the cup down carefully on the small table beside the bed. "Claire." "Claire?" She hesitated. "Brennan." The pause before the last name didn't escape Daniel's notice, but he didn't press. "I'm Daniel Wyatt. This is my ranch. Been here 20 years, since after the war." "The war." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That seems like another lifetime." It was. Daniel pulled his chair closer, sat down. "Miss Brennan." "Mrs." The word came out sharp, automatic, then softer. "I'm married. Or I was. I don't—" She closed her eyes, took a shaking breath. It's complicated. All right. Mrs. Brennan, what were you doing out there? Where were you headed? Anywhere. She opened her eyes, and the emptiness in them hit Daniel like a fist to the chest. Anywhere that wasn't where I was. You were alone? No traveling companions? I had a horse. 2 horses, pulling the wagon. When the storm hit, they panicked, broke free. I tried to hold on, but she looked down at her hands, at the white fingers that still hadn't regained their color. I let them go. I thought I could wait it out in the wagon, but it just kept getting colder. The wind was so loud. I couldn't think. I decided to walk, to find help, but I couldn't see anything. Everything was white. I fell, and I couldn't get up. And then I just stopped feeling cold, started feeling warm. That's when I knew. That's when you knew you were dying, Daniel finished quietly. She nodded. I remember thinking it wasn't so bad, the dying part, that at least it would be over. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy with meaning, Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to unpack. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, rattling the windows, finding every crack in the walls. But inside, in the firelight, something was happening. Some connection being forged, fragile as frost, between 2 people who'd been strangers an hour ago. Well, Daniel said finally, clearing his throat. You're not dying tonight, not on my watch. Why? The question was simple, but the way she asked it, as if she genuinely couldn't fathom why anyone would care, made Daniel's chest tighten. Because that's what decent people do, he said. They help when they can. She studied him again with that unsettling intensity. Are you a decent man, Daniel Wyatt? I try to be. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Something that might have been a smile flickered across her face, there and gone like a candle flame in wind. Fair enough. She was fading. He could see it, exhaustion pulling her back under. Daniel stood, pulled the blankets up higher around her shoulders. You should sleep, real sleep, now that you're warm. We can talk more in the morning. Will the storm be over by morning? Daniel glanced toward the window, where snow pressed against the glass in solid white sheets. No, storm like this, it'll blow for days, but we've got supplies, firewood, food. We can wait it out. We. She repeated the word softly, as if testing it. I'm not used to we. Get some rest, Mrs. Brennan. Claire. Her eyes were already closing. If I'm going to be trapped in your cabin for days, you should call me Claire. All right then, Claire. He watched until her breathing evened out, until he was sure she was truly asleep and not slipping back into that other darkness. Then he added more wood to the fire, pulled on his coat, and headed out to the barn to check on Prophet and the other animals. The storm hit him like a wall the moment he opened the door. He bent double against it, following the rope he'd strung from cabin to barn during the first winter after Margaret died. A man could get lost and die in the 30 feet between buildings in a storm like this. He'd known it to happen. Prophet whinnied when Daniel stumbled into the barn, grateful for human company. The other horses, a mare named Sadie and an old gelding called Whiskey, shifted in their stalls, warm breath steaming in the cold. The barn was better insulated than the cabin, built to protect valuable animals. Daniel checked their water, their feed, made sure they all had enough hay to get through the night. Got a visitor, boys, he said, stroking Prophet's nose. Woman I found in the snow, half dead when I brought her in. Prophet snorted, as if to say women were nothing but trouble, and Daniel laughed despite himself. You might be right about that, but we couldn't let her die, could we? He stayed in the barn longer than necessary, checking things that didn't need checking, avoiding the questions waiting for him back in the cabin. Questions like, who was Claire Brennan really? Why was she alone in a wagon during the worst blizzard in 20 years? What was she running from? Because she was definitely running from something or someone. And why did the word complicated, when she mentioned her marriage status, make Daniel's jaw tighten with an anger he had no right to feel? Finally, when he couldn't put it off any longer, he followed the rope back to the cabin, shook off the snow, and went inside. The fire had burned down a little. He built it back up, then settled into his chair by the hearth, wrapped in a blanket, and tried to sleep. It didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her lying in the snow, blue-lipped and still. Saw her dark eyes opening, full of terror and something else, something broken that recognized something broken in him. "You don't get to die in my house," he'd said, but maybe the truth was simpler and more selfish than that. Maybe what he'd really meant was, "You don't get to die before I figure out why finding you felt like finding something I didn't know I'd lost." The storm blew for 3 days straight. On the morning of the second day, Claire was strong enough to sit up, to drink the coffee Daniel brought her, to eat a few bites of the venison stew he'd made. She didn't talk much, but she watched him moving around the cabin with those dark, careful eyes, tracking his every movement like a deer watching a wolf, never quite sure if she needed to run. Daniel tried to give her space, tried not to hover, but it was a small cabin, and there were only so many places to be. He busied himself with small tasks, repairing a bridle, sharpening his knife, organizing supplies that didn't need organizing, anything to avoid the strange tension that filled the air whenever they were both awake. On the third day, the wind finally died down. The snow didn't stop, but it fell straight now instead of sideways, soft flakes drifting down in relative peace. Claire was up and dressed in her own clothes, the dress Daniel had carefully dried and mended where it had torn. She stood by the window, looking out at the white world, her arms wrapped around herself. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "And terrible." Daniel joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. "That's Montana. Beautiful and terrible, often at the same time." "Is it always like this? The isolation?" "Sometimes. Winter can be hard, but spring comes eventually, always does." She glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. "You believe that? That spring always comes?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point?" She turned back to the window. "My mother used to say that. She'd say, 'Claire, no matter how long the winter, spring will come.' She died when I was 15. Spring hadn't come yet." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most honest response. After a moment, Claire spoke again, her voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear. "I should tell you about where I came from, why I was out there." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him, and her eyes were hard now, defensive. "You saved my life. You deserve to know what kind of person you saved." Daniel waited. "I was married," Claire began, each word careful and measured, as if she was walking across thin ice, "to a man named Thomas Brennan. We lived in Helena. He owned a freight company, did well for himself after the war. Everyone thought he was a good man, respectable, church-going." She paused, her jaw working, and Daniel saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. "He wasn't good. He hurt me. For 2 years, he hurt me. I tried to leave 3 times. He always found me, always brought me back. The last time," her voice broke. "The last time he said if I tried again, he'd kill me. And I believed him." Daniel felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. "Did he?" "I wasn't going to try a 4th time," Claire continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "I was going to wait until he did it. Until he finally went too far and killed me, because at least then it would be over. But then," she touched her stomach in a gesture so quick Daniel almost missed it. "I found out I was pregnant." The cabin seemed to shrink around them. Daniel couldn't breathe. "I couldn't let him hurt a child," Claire whispered. "I couldn't. So I took what I could carry, stole his wagon and horses, and I ran. That was 6 weeks ago. I've been running ever since, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough for him to catch up. When the storm hit, I thought it was over. I thought he'd found me, that this was punishment for thinking I could ever be free. But it wasn't," Daniel said. "No." She looked up at him, and tears were streaming down her face now, silent and steady. "It was you. It was spring coming early. It was a second chance I don't deserve." "Stop." The word came out harder than Daniel intended. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "Don't say that. Don't ever say you don't deserve to live. You don't understand." "I understand plenty." His voice was rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "I understand that you survived something that would have broken most people. I understand that you had the courage to run when running might get you killed. And I understand that any man who would hurt a woman deserves—" He stopped, forcing himself to breathe, to calm down. "He doesn't deserve you thinking about him one more second." Claire stared at him, her eyes wide and wet. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "Do you?" Her voice turned sharp, defensive. "Do you know I stole from him? That I took his horses, his wagon, money from his lockbox? Do you know I've lied to every person I've met since I left? Used false names in every town? Do you know that I know you're standing here alive when you should be dead." Daniel heard the intensity in his own voice and tried to dial it back, failed. "I know you fought when most would have given up. I know you're brave and strong, and you damn well deserve to be free." The words hung between them, raw and honest, and Daniel realized too late how much he'd revealed, how much he'd let her matter in just 3 days. Claire must have realized it too, because she took a step back, her expression shifting from vulnerable to guarded. "You don't have to save me, Daniel. You already did that. You don't owe me anything more. I don't do things because I owe them." "Then why?" She wrapped her arms around herself again, that defensive gesture he was beginning to recognize. "Why care what happens to me? Why not just point me toward the next town and send me on my way when the storm clears?" It was a fair question. Daniel wished he had a good answer. "Because," he said slowly, "I've been alone in this cabin for 7 years. 7 years of nothing but me and the horses and the snow and the silence. And in 3 days, you've made me remember what it's like to have another person here. To have someone to talk to, someone to worry about, someone to—" He stopped, realizing he was saying too much, going too far. "Someone to what?" Claire asked softly. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, at the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, at the strength in her eyes despite everything she'd been through, at the way she held herself together even when she was clearly falling apart inside. "Someone to care about," he finished quietly. The silence that followed was different from the ones before, heavier, more dangerous. "You don't know me," Claire repeated, but her voice was softer now, uncertain. "Then stay. Let me know you." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because he'll find me eventually. He always does. And when he does—" "Let him come." Daniel's voice was flat, cold. "Let him try." Claire's eyes widened. "You don't know what you're saying. Thomas he's dangerous. He has money, connections. He won't just let me go. He won't have a choice." "Daniel." "Claire." He took another step closer, close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of the soap she'd used that morning. "Listen to me. You're safe here. I don't care who your husband is or how much money he has or how many men he brings with him. This is my land, and I decide who's welcome on it and who's not. And any man who'd hurt you," his hands clenched into fists at his sides, "he's not welcome. You can't protect me forever. Watch me." They stared at each other, and Daniel saw the moment something shifted in her eyes, saw fear give way to something that might have been hope, or might have been something more dangerous than hope. "I'm going to be trouble for you," Claire said, but she didn't move away. "I can handle trouble." "You say that now." "I'll say it tomorrow too, and the day after that." A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both." This time she did laugh, a real laugh that transformed her face, made her look younger, lighter, like a person who hadn't spent 2 years being hurt by the man who was supposed to love her. "All right," she said finally. "All right, I'll stay. For now. Until the snow melts and I can—" She trailed off, not finishing the thought. "Until spring," Daniel said. "Until spring," she agreed. And standing there in his small cabin, with the snow still falling outside and the fire crackling behind them, Daniel felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen for 7 years starting to thaw. He didn't know if it was smart or stupid or somewhere in between. Didn't know if this woman with her secrets and her sadness and her dangerous husband somewhere out there looking for her would destroy the quiet life he'd built in this lonely place. All he knew was that when he'd found her in the snow, half dead and giving up, some part of him had recognized some part of her. 2 broken things calling to each other across the wind. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The next morning, Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and something baking. He sat up in the chair where he'd spent another uncomfortable night. He'd given Claire the bed, wouldn't hear any argument about it, and rubbed his eyes. The cabin was warm, the fire burning strong, and Claire was standing at the stove, her back to him, humming something under her breath. For a moment, Daniel just watched her, afraid to move and break whatever spell had settled over his cabin in the night. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple braid, and she was wearing one of his flannel shirts over her dress, because the cabin was still cold in the mornings. The shirt was too big on her, hung almost to her knees, and something about seeing her in his clothes made Daniel's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "You're awake," Claire said without turning around. "Coffee's hot." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She glanced over her shoulder, and there was a shyness in her smile that hadn't been there yesterday. "You've been taking care of me for days. The least I can do is make breakfast." Daniel stood, stretched his back. He was getting too old to sleep in chairs, and poured himself a cup of coffee. It was good, strong and black, the way he liked it. "What are you making?" "Biscuits, or trying to. I'm not much of a cook, but I know the basics." She opened the oven. The small wood stove had an oven built in, one of the few luxuries Daniel had allowed himself, and peered inside. "They're not burning yet, so that's promising." "I'm sure they'll be fine." They ate breakfast in companionable silence. The biscuits were a little lopsided but tasted good, and Claire seemed pleased when Daniel ate 3 of them. After, she insisted on cleaning up while Daniel went out to check on the animals and assess the storm damage. The world outside was transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep across everything, smooth and pristine except where the wind had carved it into strange shapes. The sky was clearing, patches of blue showing between gray clouds, and the temperature had risen, still cold but not the killing cold of the blizzard. Daniel could work in this, could dig out paths, could start repairs. He spent the morning shoveling, making paths from cabin to barn to woodshed. The work was hard but satisfying, the kind of labor that cleared the mind and tired the body in good ways. He was working on the path to the chicken coop when Claire came out, bundled in every warm thing she owned, carrying a mug of coffee for him. "Thought you might need this," she said, her breath steaming in the cold air. Daniel leaned on his shovel and took the mug gratefully. "Thanks. You didn't have to come out in the cold." "I wanted to see it. The ranch and daylight, when I'm not half dead." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The cabin with its stone chimney leaking wood smoke into the pale sky, the barn with its weathered red paint, the corrals and outbuildings, the mountains rising in the distance, white peaks against blue sky. Beyond the ranch, as far as the eye could see, nothing but snow and sage and emptiness. "It's lonely," Claire said finally. "Yes. But beautiful, too." "Yes." She looked at him, her eyes serious. "You really live out here by yourself? All year?" 7 years now, since Margaret died." "Margaret was your wife?" Daniel nodded, surprised at how little it hurt to say her name out loud. Time didn't heal all wounds, but it dulled the edges some. "She got pneumonia one winter. Happened fast. Gone in 4 days." "I'm sorry." "Long time ago now." Claire was quiet for a moment, then, "Do you get lonely?" It was a simple question, but Daniel found himself really thinking about it. "I did at first, thought I'd go crazy with it. But then I got used to it. Started to prefer it even. No complications out here, no one to disappoint or hurt. Just me and the land and the animals." "And now? Now what?" "Are you lonely now?" Daniel looked at her. This woman who'd stumbled into his life in the middle of a blizzard, this stranger who already felt less like a stranger than she should and found he couldn't lie. "Less than I was a week ago." Something passed across Claire's face, too quick for Daniel to read. She turned away, looking out at the mountains again. "You barely know me, Daniel." "I'm starting to." "What if you don't like what you learn?" "I'll take that chance." She glanced back at him, and he saw it again, that flicker of hope fighting against fear. "You're either very kind or very foolish." "Probably both," Daniel said, echoing their conversation from the day before. It made Claire smile, which had been his intention. They stood there for a while, not talking, just being. Daniel finished his coffee and went back to shoveling. Claire didn't go back inside right away. She stayed, watching him work. And when he glanced up once he saw her touching her stomach again, that same quick protective gesture that meant baby, that meant something precious she was trying to protect. His baby. Thomas Brennan's baby. The baby of a man who'd hurt her for 2 years. Daniel felt anger rise in his throat like bile, hot and bitter. He attacked the snow with his shovel, each scoop an outlet for rage he had no right to feel, no business acting on. By the time he finished the path and looked up again, Claire had gone back inside. That evening, they sat by the fire after supper, and Claire asked him about the ranch. "How much land do you have?" 160 acres, standard homestead claim. Took it up back in '71, after Margaret and I came out from Ohio. "Is it enough to make a living?" "Barely. I run about 50 head of cattle, sell them in Gardner come fall. Keep chickens for eggs, have a garden in summer, hunt and fish for most of my meat. It's not much, but it's mine, free and clear." "No debts?" "Not a one. Owe nothing to no one." Claire nodded, staring into the fire. "That must be nice. Being free like that?" "It is." Thomas always had debts. Always owed someone something, even though the freight business did well. He'd gamble, you see. Cards, horses, anything he could bet on. Sometimes he'd win, but mostly he'd lose. When he lost, she touched her arm absently, and Daniel knew without asking that she was touching a bruise that had long since faded. He'd get mean. "Did anyone know? Did you tell anyone?" "Who would I tell?" Her laugh was bitter. "Thomas was respected in Helena. On the city council, friends with the mayor. I was just his wife. His property. No one would have believed me, and even if they had," she shrugged. "A man's got a right to discipline his wife as he sees fit. That's what the law says, isn't it?" "The law's wrong." Claire looked at him, surprise clear on her face. "Most men don't think so. Most men are idiots." This time her laugh was genuine, if still tinged with sadness. "You're different, Daniel Wyatt. Just doing what's right. That's what makes you different." They fell into silence again, but it was comfortable now, easy. Daniel found himself relaxing, letting his guard down in a way he hadn't with another person in years. There was something about Claire, something in the way she looked at the world, weary but not broken, hurt but not defeated, that made him want to trust her with pieces of himself he usually kept locked away. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said after a while. "Sure." "Why did you really come out in that storm? It wasn't just to check fence lines, was it? No one risks their life for fence lines." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, deciding how honest to be. Finally, "You're right. It wasn't about the fences." "Then what?" "I don't know exactly. I had this feeling. Like I needed to go out, needed to check, needed to be out there right then. Doesn't make sense, I know." "Like you were supposed to find me?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a fool who got lucky." Claire studied him in the firelight, her expression thoughtful. "I don't believe in luck, or fate, or divine intervention. I used to, before Thomas. But 2 years of praying to be rescued and having those prayers go unanswered kind of kills that belief." But you found me anyway, right when I'd given up, right when I'd decided to just lie down in the snow and let it be over." She paused. "That means something, doesn't it?" Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Didn't know if anything meant anything or if the world was just chaos and chance and people stumbling into each other in blizzards. All he knew was that he'd found her, pulled her from the snow, brought her back from the edge of death. And now she was here, sitting by his fire, wearing his flannel shirt, growing a baby in her belly that would need protecting come spring. "I think," he said slowly, "that we don't always get to know the why of things. We just have to decide what we're going to do about them." "And what are you going to do? About me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them were quite ready to examine. "Keep you safe," Daniel said, "for as long as you'll let me." Claire's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "You don't have to love me, Daniel. You don't owe me that." The words hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly Daniel understood what this conversation was really about. She was giving him an out, telling him he could help her without having to feel anything, without having to care beyond basic human decency. She was protecting him, Or maybe she was protecting herself. Daniel stood, crossed the small space between them, knelt down beside her chair so they were eye to eye. Her breath caught, and he saw her pulse jumping in her throat. "Claire," he said softly, "I need you to understand something." "What?" "It's already too late for that." "Too late for what?" "To not care. To not—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "When I found you in that snow, something changed. I don't know how to explain it, and I'm not saying I'm in love with you. I'm not fool enough to claim that after less than a week. But I'm saying that I care what happens to you. I care if you're safe. I care if you're happy. And no, you don't owe me anything. And no, I don't owe you anything. But that doesn't change the fact that I care." Claire stared at him, her eyes wide and wet. "You barely know me." "I know enough to know I want to know more. I'm pregnant with another man's child. I don't care. He'll come looking for me. Let him. I'm damaged, Daniel. Broken. I don't know if I can ever— Stop." He reached up, gently touched her face, felt her flinch before she forced herself still. "You're not broken. You're surviving. There's a difference." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Daniel caught it with his thumb. "You don't have to love me," Claire whispered again, like a prayer or a plea. "Too late," Daniel said, and meant it. They sat there in this firelight, the truth hanging between them, like the first thaw after a long winter, tentative and fragile and full of dangerous promise. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows, but inside the cabin it was warm. Inside, for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt quite so alone. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them had planned, but both seemed to need. Daniel woke before dawn, built up the fire, made coffee. Claire would wake to the smell of it, emerge from behind the curtain he'd strung across one corner to give her privacy, and they'd share breakfast in comfortable silence. Then Daniel would head out to tend the animals and work on winter repairs while Claire kept the cabin warm, mended clothes, and tried her hand at cooking with the limited supplies available. It was domestic in a way that should have felt strange, should have felt too fast, but somehow didn't. Maybe because they were both so starved for companionship. Maybe because the isolation of the ranch, the endless white landscape stretching in all directions, created its own reality separate from the rules of the world beyond. Or maybe, Daniel thought as he watched Claire laugh at something one of the chickens did, maybe it was just right in a way neither of them wanted to question too closely. 2 weeks after the blizzard, Claire was in the cabin kneading bread dough when Daniel came in from morning chores, his face tight with worry. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, her hands stilling in the flour. Daniel pulled off his gloves, moved to the window. "Tracks. In the snow. Fresh ones. From this morning." Claire's face went pale. "What kind of tracks?" "Horse. Single rider, came up from the south road, circled the property, then headed back the way he came." Daniel turned to look at her. "Could be nothing. Could be a drifter, someone lost, checking to see if the ranch was occupied." "But you don't think so?" "No, I don't." He moved away from the window, started checking his rifle, loading cartridges with practiced efficiency. Whoever it was, they were careful. "Stayed just out of range, kept to the tree line. That's not how lost travelers behave." Claire wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, the gesture automatic, her mind clearly somewhere else. How long would it take someone to get to Helena and back? If they were looking for me? Daniel did the math in his head. 3 weeks, maybe less if they pushed hard and the weather held. It's been 5 weeks since you left? 6 tomorrow. Then it's possible. He set the rifle down, crossed to where she stood frozen by the table. "Claire, look at me." She did, and the fear in her eyes made something in Daniel's chest clench tight. "I told you I'd keep you safe," he said. "I meant it. But I need you to be straight with me. What exactly are we dealing with? How many men would your husband send?" Claire's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, pressed them against her stomach. "Thomas has money. He could hire 10 men, 20. He wouldn't come himself. He never does his own dirty work. He'd send someone. Maybe his foreman, a man named Ridley. Or he'd hire a bounty hunter." "Does he know you're pregnant?" "No. I didn't know myself until after I'd left." Daniel nodded slowly, thinking. That might work in our favor. He can't know for sure which direction you went, can't know if you survived the blizzard. But if someone's been asking questions in Gardner, if they've been tracking wagon trails, they'd find me. Claire's voice was hollow. Eventually, they'd find me. Not if we're smart about it. Daniel moved back to the window, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved out there except wind-blown snow and the occasional bird. First thing, we need to know who we're dealing with. Could be just a scout, someone checking ranches, asking questions. Could be nothing to do with you at all. You don't believe that? No, Daniel admitted. But I hope it anyway. They spent the rest of the day in tense vigilance. Daniel kept his rifle close, checked the windows every hour, made sure all the doors were barred. Claire tried to go about her normal tasks, but Daniel could see her jumping at every sound, every creak of settling wood or gust of wind against the walls. That night, as they sat by the fire, Claire finally spoke the fear that had been sitting between them all day. I should leave. Before they come back. Before they find me here and make trouble for you. No. Daniel. I said no. He set down the knife he'd been sharpening, turned to face her. Where would you go? It's still winter. You're pregnant. And if someone's already scouting the area, then leaving now would just make you an easier target. But if they find me here, if Thomas finds out you've been sheltering me, let him find out. This is my land, Claire. Mine. I decide who stays and who goes, and I'm telling you that you're staying. She looked at him with something between gratitude and despair. You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me. Claire was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she was reciting facts about someone else's life. Thomas Brennan owns the largest freight company in Helena. He has contracts with the territorial government, with mining companies, with the railroad. He has judges in his pocket, law enforcement on his payroll. When I tried to leave the second time, he had me declared mentally unstable. Had a doctor sign papers saying I was a danger to myself. No one questioned it. That's not legal. It didn't matter. Who was going to argue with him? His wife was hysterical. Everyone agreed. Poor Thomas, dealing with a mad woman. Her laugh was bitter as ashes. The third time I tried, he broke my ribs. Told everyone I'd fallen down the stairs. The doctor who treated me knew. I could see it in his eyes. But he wrote accidental injury on the report and never said a word. Daniel felt rage building in his chest, hot and choking. Why didn't anyone help you? Because men like Thomas don't face consequences, Daniel. They're too rich, too connected, too respected. And women like me, she touched her stomach again. We're just property that occasionally gets damaged. You're not property. The law says different. Then the law is wrong. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. You really believe that, don't you? That there's a difference between what's legal and what's right? Always have. That's a dangerous belief for a man to have. Maybe. But it's the one I've got. She smiled then, sad and sweet and heartbreaking. You're going to get yourself killed for me, Daniel Wyatt. Rather that than live with not trying. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft and steady, covering the tracks from the morning, erasing evidence of the visitor who may or may not be hunting for the woman in Daniel's cabin. Tell me about Margaret, Claire said suddenly. Your wife. What was she like? Daniel was surprised by the question, more surprised by how willing he was to answer it. She was good, kind, patient with me when I didn't deserve it. We grew up together in Ohio, got married young. When the war ended and I came back, he paused, remembering. I wasn't the same man she'd married. War does that, changes you in ways you can't explain to people who weren't there. But she stayed. She stayed, said she didn't marry me for who I was. She married me for who we'd be together. When I told her I wanted to go west, start fresh somewhere no one knew us, she packed her things without a single complaint. He smiled at the memory. She hated it here at first. Hated the cold, the isolation, the wind. But she stuck it out. Made this place a home. You loved her. Yes. Do you still? It was a bold question, maybe too bold, but Daniel found he didn't mind. I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and life keeps moving whether we want it to or not. Claire nodded slowly. I never loved Thomas. Not even in the beginning. My father owed him money, and Thomas offered to forgive the debt if I'd marry him. I was 23, my father was dying, and I thought— She shrugged. I thought it was the right thing to do. Sacrifice myself to save my family. Noble, stupid girl that I was. That's not stupid. That's brave. No, it was stupid. Brave would have been saying no. Brave would have been finding another way. Instead, I sold myself for my father's debt, and he died 6 months later anyway, so it didn't even matter in the end. It mattered. It mattered because you tried. Claire looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Why are you so kind to me? Why shouldn't I be? Because I've done nothing to earn it. I'm trouble, Daniel. I'm a married woman pregnant with another man's child, with a dangerous husband hunting for me, and I'm sitting in your cabin eating your food and wearing your dead wife's shawl, and I've got no right to any of it. Daniel stood, crossed to where she sat, knelt down beside her chair the way he had that first night. You've got every right. You're a person, Claire, a human being who deserves safety and kindness and a warm place to sleep. You don't have to earn those things. They should be given freely. That's not how the world works. It's how my world works. She reached out, hesitant, and touched his face. Just a gentle brush of her fingers against his bearded cheek. It was the first time she'd touched him willingly, and Daniel held very still, afraid to move and break whatever fragile trust was forming between them. You're a good man, Daniel Wyatt, she whispered. I'm trying to be. That's what makes you good. They stayed like that for a long moment, her hand on his face, his eyes on hers, the fire warm behind them, and the snow falling soft outside. Then Claire leaned forward, slow and careful, and pressed her forehead to his. They didn't kiss, didn't cross that line, but the intimacy of the gesture, the simple human contact, the shared warmth and breath, was more powerful than any kiss could have been. I'm scared, Claire breathed against his skin. I know. Not just of Thomas finding me. I'm scared of this, of whatever's happening between us, of caring about you when I know it can't end well. Who says it can't? Life does. Experience does. The fact that I'm married to a man who will kill you if he finds out you're sheltering me. Daniel pulled back enough to look her in the eyes. Then let him try. You keep saying that like it's simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Either I stand up for what's right or I don't. Either I protect you or I don't. Either I care about you or I don't. He paused. And I do, Claire. I care about you. Maybe that's stupid. Maybe it's too fast. Maybe it'll get me killed. But it's true. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. You don't have to love me. Too late, Daniel said again, and this time when he said it, he knew it was true. Not romantic love, not yet. They barely knew each other, after all, but something deeper and more fundamental. The kind of caring that comes from recognizing yourself in another person, from seeing their pain and wanting to take it away, from standing at a crossroads and choosing to step forward instead of back. Claire kissed him then, just a soft press of lips against lips, there and gone, more promise than passion. When she pulled away, she was smiling through her tears. You're going to break my heart, Daniel Wyatt. Not if I can help it. You might not have a choice. Then we'll face it together. She laughed, a sound halfway between joy and sorrow. Together. I like the sound of that. So do I. That night, after Claire had gone to bed behind her curtain, Daniel sat by the fire and tried to think through what he was getting himself into. He'd meant everything he'd said to her, meant it with a conviction that surprised even himself, but that didn't change the facts. She was married. She was pregnant with another man's child. She had a powerful, dangerous husband who would eventually come looking for her. And Daniel was just a rancher with 160 acres and a rifle and a stubborn streak a mile wide. By any rational measure, he should send her away. Should give her some money, point her toward California or Oregon, wish her well, and let her disappear into the West. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But Daniel had never been particularly smart or safe, and he'd learned during the war that sometimes you had to stand for something even when standing meant dying. And if Claire Brennan was what he was going to stand for, well, he could think of worse hills to die on. The next morning, Daniel woke to find Claire already up, dressed in her traveling clothes, her few possessions packed in a bundle by the door. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and sudden panic. "Leaving." She wouldn't look at him. "It's better this way. Safer for you. I should have left days ago." "Claire." "No, Daniel. Listen to me. Last night was... It was beautiful. It was everything I didn't know I needed. But it doesn't change reality. I'm putting you in danger just by being here. If those tracks were Thomas's men, if they come back, they won't find anything. You can't know that." "Yes, I can." Daniel crossed to her, took her shoulders gently. "Because I'm not letting you leave. Not like this. Not alone. You don't get a say?" "The hell I don't." His voice was firm but not angry. "You think I'm just going to let you walk out into the snow, pregnant and alone, with no horse and no supplies and bounty hunters, maybe circling? You think I pulled you out of one blizzard just to let you die in another?" "I'm not your responsibility." "No, you're my choice. There's a difference." Claire stared at him, her eyes fierce and frightened. "Why? Why are you doing this? We barely know each other." "Because someone has to. Because you deserve better than what life's given you. Because..." He stopped, searching for the right words. "Because when I found you in that snow, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. A reason to care about something beyond this ranch and these four walls. A reason to fight for something. And I'm not giving that up without a hell of a fight. That's not fair. Life's not fair. We work with what we've got." She was crying again, and Daniel pulled her close, held her while she shook. "I'm so tired of running," she whispered into his chest. "I'm so tired of being scared." "Then stop. Stay here. Let me help you." "He'll kill you." "He can try." "Daniel." "Claire." He pulled back, tipped her chin up so she had to look at him. "I've been dead inside for 7 years, just going through the motions, waiting for something to care about. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to want tomorrow. So yeah, maybe your husband will come. Maybe there will be trouble. Maybe it'll end badly. But at least I'll have lived first. At least I'll have tried." She studied his face for a long moment, her dark eyes searching. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. All right, I'll stay. But Daniel, if things get dangerous..." "When things get dangerous," he corrected. "Not if. When. When things get dangerous, you have to promise me you'll think about yourself too. You'll be smart about it. I promise to do my best to keep us both alive. That's all I can promise." "I suppose that'll have to be enough." She unpacked her bundle and Daniel made breakfast, and they didn't talk about the tracks in the snow or the danger waiting somewhere beyond the ranch or the impossibility of what they were trying to build here. They just lived, moment to moment, day to day, stealing happiness where they could find it. That afternoon, Daniel taught Claire to shoot. They stood in the snow behind the cabin, and he showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked, after missing the log he'd set up as a target for the third time. "Because if trouble comes, I need to know you can defend yourself. I can't be everywhere at once." "You really think it'll come to that? To shooting?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching the mountains. "I hope not. But hoping doesn't cost anything, and preparation might save your life." She tried again, and this time the bullet clipped the edge of the log. Not a great shot, but better. "Good," Daniel said. Again. They practiced until her arms were shaking and her ears were ringing from the shots. By the end, she could hit the log more often than not. Not perfect, but better than nothing. That evening, Daniel rode into Gardner to pick up supplies and, more importantly, to ask questions. The town was small, barely more than a cluster of buildings near the northern entrance to what would someday be Yellowstone National Park, but it was the closest thing to civilization for 50 miles. He found what he was looking for at the saloon, where Tom Morrison, the bartender, knew everything worth knowing about everyone passing through. "Tom," Daniel said, sliding onto a bar stool. "Whiskey and information if you've got it." Tom poured the drink, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of information?" "The kind about strangers asking questions. Anyone been through here lately, looking for a woman? Young, dark hair, traveling alone?" Tom's expression grew cautious. Why are you asking? Personal reasons. That's not an answer, Daniel. It's the only one you're getting. Tom studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Yeah. Man came through about a week ago, well-dressed city type. Said he was looking for his wife, claimed she'd run off in some kind of fit. Had a description that could have been any number of women. Daniel's hands tightened on his glass. He give a name? Called himself Ridley. Said he worked for a freight company out of Helena, that his employer's wife had gone missing during a blizzard, that the man was worried sick. What'd you tell him? Told him the truth. Haven't seen any lone women traveling through. Blizzard killed anyone who wasn't smart enough to hole up somewhere. Tom paused. Should I have told him different? No, you did right. Daniel, Tom leaned in, his voice low. You got a woman at your place? Because if you do, if she's running from something bad, you need to be careful. This Ridley character, he didn't seem like the type to give up easy. I'll be careful. I'm serious. He was asking questions all over town, offering money for information. That's not a man just doing a job. That's a man who's getting paid well to find someone. Daniel finished his whiskey, set the glass down. How much money? $100 for information leading to her whereabouts. Another $100 for whoever brings her back. Tom whistled low. That's serious money, Daniel. That's enough to make good people think bad thoughts. Anyone take him up on it? Not that I know of. But in this economy, with winter dragging on and folks getting desperate, won't be long before someone does. Daniel stood, threw coins on the bar. Thanks, Tom. I owe you. Just be careful. And Daniel? Tom caught his arm. If this woman you may or may not have at your place is worth protecting, then protect her, but don't be stupid about it. Men like this Ridley, they don't play fair. Neither do I when it comes to things that matter. The ride back to the ranch was cold and dark, and Daniel spent it thinking about what Tom had told him. $100 was more money than most people saw in a year. That kind of reward would loosen tongues, would make people look twice at any stranger, any unfamiliar face, which meant time was running out. When he got back to the cabin, Claire was waiting by the window, her face pale with worry. You were gone so long, I thought, I'm fine, but we need to talk. He told her everything Tom had said, watched her face crumble as the reality of their situation sank in. Ridley, she whispered. I knew it. I knew Thomas would send him. Tell me about him. He's Thomas's foreman. Been with the company for 10 years. He's loyal, brutal, and he doesn't quit. If Thomas hired him to find me... She wrapped her arms around herself. We're out of time, aren't we? Not yet. But soon. Daniel moved to her, took her hands. Listen to me. We need to be smart about this. We need a plan. What kind of plan? The kind where we stop running and start standing our ground. Over the next few days, they prepared. Daniel taught Claire more about shooting, about loading and cleaning the rifle, about how to barricade herself in the cabin if needed. He showed her where he kept extra ammunition, where the money was hidden, where the best places to hide were if someone came while he was out. They were practical preparations, the kind any sensible person would make when facing a threat. But underneath the practicality was something else, a growing certainty that they were building something worth fighting for, worth defending, worth the risk. 3 weeks after the tracks appeared, on a clear March morning when the snow was finally starting to melt, and the first hints of spring were showing in the longer days and warmer sun, Daniel spotted riders approaching from the south, 3 of them. He'd been repairing a fence post when he saw them, 3 dark figures on horseback moving slowly up the ranch road. Too slow to be friendly visitors, too deliberate to be lost travelers. Daniel dropped his tools and ran for the cabin. Claire, he burst through the door. We've got company. 3 riders coming from the south. Her face went white. Thomas? Can't tell yet, but we're not taking chances. He grabbed his rifle, handed her the smaller carbine they'd been practicing with. Remember what I taught you. You stay inside, keep the door barred. Don't open it for anyone but me. If things go bad, Daniel, if things go bad, you take the money from under the floorboard, you take profit from the barn, and you ride north to Fort Ellis. Ask for Captain Morrison. He's Tom's brother. He'll help you. You understand? I'm not leaving you. Claire, I said I'm not leaving you. Her voice was fierce, her eyes bright. I've run from enough fights. If this one's coming, I'm standing with you." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the cabin and face the riders alone, but there wasn't time. They were close now, maybe 5 minutes out. "All right," he said. "All right. But you stay behind me, and you don't shoot unless I tell you to. Agreed?" "Agreed." They took positions on the porch, Daniel in front, Claire behind him, and to the left, both rifles loaded and ready. The morning sun was bright on the snow, making Daniel squint as the 3 riders approached. As they got closer, Daniel could make out details. The man in the lead was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The 2 behind him were younger, harder-looking, the kind of men hired for their willingness to do violence. The lead rider stopped about 20 feet from the porch. Up close, he had the kind of face that looked like it had been in too many fights and won most of them. His eyes, when they fixed on Daniel, were cold and assessing. "Morning," the man said. His voice was surprisingly cultured, at odds with his appearance. "Name's Ridley. I'm looking for someone, and I believe you might be able to help me." "That's so?" Daniel kept his rifle pointed at the ground, but his grip was ready. "What makes you think that?" "Let's not play games. I know you have her. Claire Brennan, Thomas Brennan's wife." Ridley's eyes shifted to Claire, standing behind Daniel, and something that might have been satisfaction crossed his face. "Hello, Mrs. Brennan. Your husband's been worried about you." Claire's voice, when she spoke, was steady despite her obvious fear. "I have nothing to say to you, Ridley, and I'm not going back." "Now, ma'am, that's not your decision to make. You're a married woman. Your place is with your husband." "Her place," Daniel said quietly, "is wherever she damn well chooses it to be." Ridley's attention snapped back to Daniel. "And who might you be? Some drifter she took up with? Some poor fool she's got convinced she's an innocent victim?" "I'm the man who owns this land, which makes you trespassing. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to bring Mrs. Brennan home, that's all." "She is home." The words hung in the cold air, simple and absolute. Daniel saw Ridley's jaw tighten, saw his hand drift toward the gun at his hip. "Mr. I don't know what she's told you, but I'm guessing it's all lies. Claire Brennan is a disturbed woman. She ran away from a good husband, a good home in the middle of winter. She's not well. She needs to come back where she can be properly cared for." "I'm not sick," Claire's voice cracked like a whip. "I left because Thomas hurt me, because he beat me, because staying meant dying and I chose to live instead." Ridley's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Brennan, these fantasies you've constructed, they're not fantasies." Claire stepped forward, and Daniel felt her presence beside him, solid and sure. "I have scars, Ridley. You've seen some of them. You know what Thomas is. You've always known." For the first time, something flickered in Ridley's eyes. Not quite shame, but close. "What happens between a man and his wife is none of your concern, which is what you're going to tell Thomas when you ride back to Helena." Daniel's voice cut through whatever Ridley was going to say. "You're going to tell him that you found his wife, that she's safe, and that she's staying here of her own free will." "I can't do that." "Sure you can, unless you want trouble, in which case I'm happy to provide it." One of the men behind Ridley shifted in his saddle, his hand moving to his gun. Daniel's rifle came up in one smooth motion, aimed directly at Ridley's chest. "I wouldn't," Daniel said calmly. Ridley raised a hand, stilling his men. "You're making a mistake. Thomas Brennan is not a man to cross. He has resources, connections. He can make life very difficult for you. Let him try. You'll lose everything. This ranch, your freedom, maybe your life. Maybe, but at least I'll lose it standing for something I believe in." Ridley studied Daniel for a long moment, and some kind of calculation was happening behind those cold eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll give you one chance to walk away from this. One chance to be smart. Give me Mrs. Brennan, take the $200 I'm authorized to offer as compensation for your trouble, and forget any of this happened." "Not interested." $200 is a lot of money." "Not enough." "What would be enough?" Daniel smiled, but there was no humor in it. "There isn't a number high enough. She's not for sale and she's not leaving. That's final." Ridley's face hardened. "Then you're a fool and you'll die a fool's death. But I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider. I'll be in Gardner, at the saloon. You bring Mrs. Brennan to me by this time tomorrow, and I'll forget about you, forget about this place, forget I ever saw her here. But if you don't, he paused. Well, then we'll be back, and next time we won't be so polite. You do what you have to do, so will I. Ridley tipped his hat, a mockery of politeness. Mrs. Brennan, I hope you understand what you're doing. I hope you understand what you're asking this man to sacrifice for you. I understand perfectly, Claire said. I'm asking him to help me stay alive, to help me stay free. That's all. Freedom. Ridley said the word like it was poison. You're a married woman, Mrs. Brennan. You have no freedom. You belong to your husband, by law and by God. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. I belong to myself. Ridley shook his head, almost pityingly. Goodbye, Mrs. Brennan. I'll see you tomorrow. He turned his horse, and his men followed. Before they'd gone 10 feet, he called back over his shoulder. 24 hours, mister. Use them wisely. They watched the three riders disappear down the road, watched until they were nothing but dark specks against white snow. Only then did Daniel lower his rifle. Only then did he let himself breathe. Claire was shaking beside him, violent tremors running through her entire body. Daniel set his rifle aside and pulled her into his arms, held her while she fought for control. It's all right, he murmured. It's all right. They're gone. For now. But they'll be back, Daniel. You heard him. They'll be back, and next time we'll be ready. She pulled away, looked up at him with eyes full of fear and something that might have been anger. You should have let me go with them. You should have taken the money. $200, Daniel. That's nothing. It's nothing compared to... He stopped, not sure how to finish. Compared to what? Compared to you. The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in their implications. Claire stared at him, and Daniel saw the moment she understood what he was really saying, what he'd been saying all along but hadn't had the courage to speak plainly. Daniel, she whispered, you barely know me. I know enough. You're going to get killed. Maybe, but at least I'll die for something that matters. She laughed then, a sound somewhere between hysteria and despair. You're insane. You're absolutely insane. Probably. You can't fight them. You can't fight Thomas Brennan and win. Watch me. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and full of all the words neither of them knew how to say. When she pulled away, they were both breathing hard. All right, Claire said. All right. If we're doing this, if we're really doing this, then we do it together. No more trying to protect each other. No more secrets. We face whatever's coming side by side. Together, Daniel agreed. Together. They had 24 hours. Not long, but maybe long enough. Daniel spent the afternoon reinforcing the cabin, barring windows, setting up positions where they could shoot from cover if needed. Claire loaded every gun they owned, prepared supplies in case they needed to flee, gathered anything valuable that could be quickly carried. They were preparing for war, and they both knew it. But underneath the practical preparations was something else. A strange kind of joy, the satisfaction of finally standing for something, of choosing to fight instead of run. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat by the fire, and Claire told Daniel about her life before Thomas, about the girl she'd been before marriage turned her into something frightened and small. Daniel told her about the war, about the things he'd seen and done that still haunted his dreams, about how coming west had been about running away as much as starting over. They talked until the fire burned low and the night grew cold, and when dawn finally came, painting the snow pink and gold, they were ready. Ready for whatever Ridley brought, ready for whatever came next, ready to stand together, come what may. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning mist, and still no riders came. Daniel stood watch from the window, his rifle never far from reach, while Claire moved through the cabin with a forced calmness that didn't quite hide the tension in her shoulders. Every sound made them both freeze, the creak of settling wood, the whistle of wind through the eaves, the distant call of a crow. Each one could be the warning that their 24 hours were up. By noon, Daniel's nerves were stretched thin as wire. Maybe they're not coming, Claire said, though her voice held no conviction. Maybe Ridley decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Men like Ridley don't back down from a job. If he hasn't come yet, it's because he's planning something, Getting more men, maybe, waiting for dark. Daniel checked his rifle for the dozenth time. Whatever he's doing, it's not giving up. Then what do we do? Just wait here like rabbits in a trap? Daniel turned from the window, looked at her standing there in the middle of his cabin, one hand unconsciously resting on her belly where a child was growing, a child that would need protecting, would need a future better than the one Claire had escaped from. Something hardened in his chest, crystallized into certainty. No, he said. We don't wait. We take the fight to them. Claire's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean, I'm tired of sitting here waiting to be attacked. I'm going into Gardner, going to face Ridley on my terms, not his. That's insane. He'll have his men with him, probably more by now. You'd be walking into... I know what I'd be walking into, but the alternative is sitting here jumping at shadows, waiting for them to come at us in the dark, when we can't see what we're facing. At least in town there'll be witnesses. Even Ridley won't risk a public killing with half the town watching. Hey? You don't know that. You heard what I told you about Thomas. He owns people, Daniel. He owns judges and lawmen and respectable citizens who will swear black is white if he pays them to. What makes you think Gardner will be any different? Because Tom Morrison won't lie for money, and neither will most of the folks I know there. Good people, Claire. Not perfect, but good. They won't stand by and watch murder happen in broad daylight. She crossed to him, grabbed his arms. And what if you're wrong? What if they do nothing? What if Ridley shoots you down in the street and everyone just looks the other way? Then at least you'll have time to run. Take profit. Head north like we talked about. You'll have a chance. I don't want a chance without you in it. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate, and Daniel saw tears streaming down her face. He pulled her close, felt her shaking against him. Hey, he said softly. Hey, look at me. She did, her dark eyes wet and frightened. I'm not planning on dying today. I'm planning on ending this, one way or another. But if something does happen, I need to know you'll be smart about it, that you won't do something foolish like trying to fight them yourself. You're asking me to run while you die. How is that fair? It's not, but it's necessary. That baby you're carrying deserves a chance at life, Claire. A real life, not one spent hiding from Thomas Brennan. If I can buy that chance with my life, then it's worth it. She was shaking her head, tears falling faster now. No, I won't accept that. There has to be another way. We could both run, right now. Forget the ranch, forget standing and fighting. We could just go, disappear into the territories where Thomas could never find us. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, living in fear, never settling anywhere long enough to call it home? That's not living, Claire. That's just a slower kind of dying. It's better than you getting killed. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, wiped away tears with his thumbs. Listen to me. I spent 7 years in this cabin, barely alive, just going through the motions. When I found you in that snow, something changed. You gave me a reason to care again, a reason to want tomorrow. I'm not going to waste that gift by running scared. I'm going to stand and fight, and I'm going to win because the alternative is unacceptable. You sound so sure. I am sure. Not sure I'll win, maybe, but sure that fighting is better than running, sure that some things are worth the risk. He paused, his voice dropping lower. You're worth the risk, Claire. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, pouring all her fear and hope and something deeper into that kiss. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't do anything stupidly heroic. I promise to do my best to come back to you. That's all I can promise. Then I guess that'll have to be enough. She pulled back, squared her shoulders, and Daniel saw steel enter her eyes. If you're going, then I'm going with you. Claire, don't argue. If you're walking into danger, I'm not sitting here wondering if you're dead or alive. We're in this together, remember? That means we face it together. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the cabin where she'd be safe, but he saw the determination in her face and knew it would be useless. Besides, a part of him, the part that had been alone too long, that craved connection and partnership, was glad she'd insisted. All right, he said. Together. But you stay close to me, and if things go bad, you run. No arguments, no hesitation. You just run. Agreed? Agreed. They prepared quickly, loading rifles and tucking pistols into belts, dressing in warm layers against the cold ride into town. Daniel saddled Prophet and Sadie, helped Claire mount, and they set off down the ranch road with the afternoon sun already starting its descent toward the mountains. The ride to Gardner took an hour, and they spent it in tense silence, both watching the landscape for signs of Ridley or his men. But the white plains remained empty, except for the occasional jackrabbit or hawk circling overhead. It was eerily peaceful, as if the land itself was holding its breath. As they approached the outskirts of town, Daniel reached over and squeezed Claire's hand. "Remember, stay close. Don't let them separate us." "I remember." Gardner was quiet in the late afternoon, most folks inside keeping warm. The saloon stood at the far end of the main street, a weathered building with a faded sign and the sound of voices drifting through its doors. Daniel tied the horses to the rail outside, helped Claire dismount, and together they pushed through the doors into the smoky interior. The conversation died the moment they entered. Every head turned, every eye fixed on them. On Daniel with his rifle in hand, on Claire standing beside him with her chin raised defiantly. At the bar, Tom Morrison's eyes went wide with alarm. And at a table in the back, Ridley sat with 4 men, cards forgotten on the table, a whiskey glass halfway to his lips. "Well," Ridley said, setting down his glass with deliberate care, "I didn't expect you to come to me. Saves us the trouble of riding out to that ranch of yours." His eyes shifted to Claire. "Mrs. Brennan, I see you've decided to be reasonable after all." "She's not going anywhere with you," Daniel said, his voice carrying in the suddenly silent room. "That's why we're here, to make that clear in front of witnesses." Ridley smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Witnesses? You think these people care what happens to a runaway wife and the fool protecting her?" "I think they care about justice, about what's right." Justice. Ridley tasted the word, found it amusing. Justice is a wife returning to her lawful husband. Everything else is just sentiment and foolishness. Justice, Claire said, her voice shaking but clear, is a woman being free from a man who beat her, who broke her ribs and blackened her eyes and made her afraid to sleep at night. A murmur ran through the saloon. Daniel saw faces change, saw sympathy and anger replace indifference. At the bar, Tom Morrison was gripping a bottle like a weapon, his jaw tight. Ridley's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Brennan, these accusations are serious. Do you have proof? Medical records? Witness statements?" "You know I don't." Thomas made sure of that. The doctors he paid, the sheriff he owned, none of them would testify against him. "Then it's your word against his, and I'm afraid his word carries more weight." Ridley stood, his men standing with him. "Now, I've been patient. I've given you time to come to your senses. But my patience has limits. You're coming back to Helena with me, Mrs. Brennan? Today. Right now." "No." Daniel stepped forward, putting himself between Ridley and Claire. "She's not going anywhere. You're interfering with a man's legal right to his wife. That's a crime in most territories. So is assault. So is terrorizing a woman half your size. So is sending armed men to drag her back to a man who'll probably kill her." Ridley's eyes went cold. Strong words from a man outnumbered 5-1. 5-2, Tom Morrison said from behind the bar. He'd produced a shotgun from somewhere, was holding it with the casual competence of a man who knew how to use it. "I don't take kindly to wife-beaters in my establishment, Ridley, or to men who threaten my friends." "This isn't your fight, Morrison. It is now." One of the miners at a nearby table stood, a big man with scarred knuckles and a face that had seen its share of violence. "Make that 5-3. My pa used to beat my ma. Broke her arm twice before she finally left him. I swore then I'd never stand by and let that happen again." Another man stood, then another. Within moments, half the saloon was on its feet, and Ridley's confident smile was starting to crack around the edges. "You're making a mistake," Ridley said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "All of you. Thomas Brennan will hear about this, and he'll remember every name, every face. He'll make you regret—" "Let him try," Tom said. "We've got a saying out here in Montana, Ridley. A man's word is his bond, and a woman's got the right to choose her own path. Maybe that's not how they do things in Helena, but it's how we do them here." Ridley looked around the room, calculating odds, reading the mood. Whatever he saw must have convinced him, because he finally nodded stiffly. Fine. You want to harbor a fugitive wife, that's your business. But this isn't over. Thomas Brennan doesn't give up. He'll send more men. He'll hire lawyers. He'll make your lives hell until he gets what he wants. Then that's what we'll face, Daniel said. But we'll face it together, with witnesses and friends and the law on our side, the real law, not the bought and paid for version. Ridley's jaw worked, fury and frustration warring in his expression. Finally, he jerked his head at his men. Let's go. This town's not worth the trouble. They moved toward the door, and the crowd parted to let them through. But as Ridley passed Daniel, he leaned in close, his voice low enough that only Daniel and Claire could hear. You think you've won something here? You've won nothing. Thomas will destroy you. He'll take your ranch, your reputation, everything you care about. And when he's done, when you're broken and ruined, he'll take his wife back anyway. All you've done is delay the inevitable and guarantee you'll suffer for it. Maybe, Daniel said quietly. But at least I'll have tried. Can you say the same? When you look in the mirror, do you see a man doing the right thing? Or just a hired gun following orders? Something flickered in Ridley's eyes, pain maybe, or the ghost of a conscience long suppressed. I do my job. That's all any of us can do. No. We can choose what jobs we take. We can choose what kind of men we want to be. You made your choice, Ridley. Live with it. Ridley stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out. His men followed, and through the saloon windows, Daniel watched them mount their horses and ride out of town, heading south toward Helena and whatever report they'd deliver to Thomas Brennan. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room broke like a dam bursting. Men were shaking Daniel's hand, clapping him on the back, offering to help if more trouble came. Tom poured drinks on the house, and someone started up a fiddle, and the saloon filled with the sound of celebration and relief. But Daniel felt none of it. He'd bought time, maybe, but Ridley was right. This wasn't over. Thomas Brennan would send more men, would use his money and connections to make life hell for everyone who'd stood against him today. And eventually, inevitably, he'd succeed. Men like Brennan always did, unless Daniel could find a way to end this permanently. Claire touched his arm, pulling him from his dark thoughts. You're quiet. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we won the battle, but not the war. I'm thinking we need a better plan than just waiting for the next attack. What kind of plan? Daniel looked at her, at the hope and fear warring in her dark eyes, and made a decision that was probably foolish and definitely dangerous, but felt right in a way few things in his life had ever felt. I'm thinking we get you legally free of Thomas Brennan. We find a lawyer, file for divorce on grounds of cruelty, make a public record of what he did to you. Even if we don't win, even if his money and influence crush us in court, at least there'll be a record, a paper trail. Something that makes it harder for him to just sweep this under the rug and pretend nothing happened. Claire stared at him. Daniel, do you know what you're suggesting? A divorce trial would be public, scandalous. My name would be dragged through every newspaper in the territory. People would call me a liar, a troublemaker, a woman of loose morals. And you'd be accused of harboring another man's wife, of adultery, of God knows what else. Your reputation would be destroyed. I don't care about my reputation, but I care about what it would cost you. I can't ask you to sacrifice everything. You're not asking. I'm offering. He took her hands, held them tight. Claire, listen. We can keep running, keep hiding, keep waiting for the next threat. Or we can fight back. Really fight back. Use the law against Thomas, the way he's been using it against you. It won't be easy, and we might lose, but at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have gone down swinging. She was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face. Around them, the saloon had returned to its normal noise and bustle, but in their small corner, it felt like they were alone in the world. You really believe we can win? She finally asked. I believe we have to try. And I believe that even if we lose, we'll have made it clear that Thomas Brennan isn't untouchable, that there are people willing to stand up to him. Maybe that'll help the next woman he hurts. Maybe it'll make the next man think twice before raising his hand to his wife. Maybe it won't change anything at all. But I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. Claire closed her eyes, took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was steel there, the same steel Daniel had seen when she'd insisted on coming to town with him. All right, she said. All right, we fight. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we really take this fight public, there's no going back. Thomas won't just send men with guns next time. He'll use the courts, the newspapers, every lever of power he has. He'll destroy us both if he can. Let him try. She laughed, the sound somewhere between despair and joy. You keep saying that like it's simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. He squeezed her hands. I choose you, Claire. I choose standing with you against whatever comes. That's my choice, freely made, and I'm not taking it back. Tears were streaming down her face again, but she was smiling through them. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the biggest fool. Probably both. Definitely both. She pulled her hands free, threw her arms around his neck, held him tight. Against his ear, she whispered, Thank you for believing me, for standing with me, for making me believe I deserve better than what Thomas gave me. You deserve everything good this world has to offer. I just want a chance at something normal, something peaceful. A home where I'm not afraid, a life where I can breathe without wondering when the next blow is coming. Then that's what we'll build, together. They stood there in the crowded saloon, holding each other while the world went on around them, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest, the last of the ice that had been there since Margaret died finally melting away completely. This woman in his arms had somehow managed to do what 7 years of solitude couldn't. She'd made him want to live again, not just survive. Tom Morrison appeared beside them, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. Thought you two could use these, on the house. Daniel took them, handed one to Claire. Thanks, Tom, for the drinks and for backing us up back there. That's what neighbors do. Besides, I meant what I said. My town, my rules. And we don't cotton to wife beaters here. He paused, his expression growing serious. But Daniel, you need to be realistic. Ridley's going to report back to Brennan, and Brennan's going to come at you hard. You're going to need more than just good intentions to fight him. I know. That's why we're going to need a lawyer. Someone who's not afraid of taking on a powerful man. Someone who believes in doing what's right over what's profitable. You know anyone like that? Tom thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. Might. There's a lawyer over in Bozeman, name of Eleanor Marsh. Used to practice in Denver before she came out here looking for a fresh start. Word is she left after winning a big case against some mining baron, made her a reputation as someone who'll take on the powerful and damn the consequences. She any good? Good enough to make that mining baron lose his fortune and his freedom. But Daniel, she's expensive. A case like this could cost hundreds of dollars, maybe more. Daniel thought about the money he had saved, the modest nest egg built up over years of frugal living. It was meant to be his security, his cushion against disaster. But what good was security if he couldn't protect the people he cared about? I'll pay whatever it takes. Can you get a message to her? Tell her I need to hire her for a divorce case, grounds of extreme cruelty, and that time is critical. I'll send a telegram first thing in the morning. Tom glanced at Claire. Ma'am, I hope you understand what you're getting into. A divorce trial, especially one involving accusations like you're making, it's going to be ugly. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life, question your morals, your sanity, your motives. They're going to make you out to be the villain. I know, Claire said quietly. I've been Thomas's villain for 2 years. I can survive being the territory's villain if it means getting free of him. Tom nodded approvingly. You've got spine, Mrs. Brennan. You're going to need it. He turned back to Daniel. You two should stay in town tonight. I've got a spare room above the saloon, nothing fancy, but it's warm and it's got a lock on the door. After today, I wouldn't put it past Ridley to double back and try something at your ranch when you're not expecting it. Daniel didn't like the idea of leaving the ranch unguarded, but Tom was right. Going back there tonight would be walking into a potential trap. We appreciate it, Tom. We'll take you up on that offer. They spent the evening in Tom's small upstairs room, a simple space with a bed, a chair, and a window overlooking the main street. Daniel kept watch while Claire dozed fitfully, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Every time a horse passed outside, every creak of settling wood, Daniel's hand went to his rifle. But the night passed quietly, and when dawn finally came, painting the mountains gold and pink, they were both still alive and together. Tom brought them breakfast and news.
Telegram sent. I also talked to Judge Harrison. He's the territorial judge, circuit rider, comes through Gardner about once a month. Told him we might have a divorce case coming up, one that'll draw attention. He said if Eleanor Marsh will take the case, he'll hear it fair. Can't ask for more than that. When's he due back in Gardner? 3 weeks, maybe 4 if the weather's bad. That give you enough time to prepare? Daniel looked at Claire, saw her nod. It'll have to be. They rode back to the ranch under clear skies, both of them hyper-alert for any sign of Ridley or his men. But the landscape remained empty, peaceful, as if yesterday's confrontation had been a fever dream. The ranch looked exactly as they'd left it, undisturbed and waiting. Over the next week they fell into a new routine, one shaped by preparation and purpose. Daniel worked on gathering evidence of Claire's injuries, writing down every detail she could remember about the abuse she'd suffered, dates, locations, witnesses who might have seen something even if they'd said nothing. It was painful work, watching Claire relive each beating, each cruel word, each moment of terror. But she did it without flinching, her voice steady as she recited the facts of her own suffering. Daniel also started asking questions around Gardner, carefully feeling out who might be willing to testify if needed. He found a surprising number of people who'd had dealings with Thomas Brennan and come away thinking less of him. A merchant who'd been cheated on a contract, a miner whose claim had been stolen through legal trickery, a widow whose husband had died in one of Brennan's warehouses, only to be told it was his own fault for being careless. None of it was proof of spousal abuse, but it painted a picture of a man willing to hurt people to get what he wanted. It was something. 10 days after the confrontation in the saloon, a woman rode up to the ranch on a handsome bay mare, her travel-stained clothes and determined expression marking her as someone who'd come a long way for a purpose. Daniel met her on the porch, rifle in hand, until she called out, "Mr. Wyatt? I'm Eleanor Marsh. Tom Morrison sent for me." Daniel lowered the rifle, studied the woman dismounting from her horse. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to walking into hostile rooms and winning anyway. "Miss Marsh, we weren't expecting you for another week at least." "I don't believe in wasting time, Mr. Wyatt. Tom's telegram said this was urgent, so I came immediately." She tied her horse to the rail, pulled a leather satchel from her saddlebag. "Is Mrs. Brennan here? I'll need to speak with her extensively." "She's inside. Come on in. I'll introduce you." Claire was kneading bread dough when they entered, and she looked up with startled eyes at the stranger. Daniel made introductions, and Eleanor got straight to business, pulling out papers and a pencil, fixing Claire with an assessing stare. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to be very direct with you because we don't have time for niceties. I've handled 3 divorce cases in my career. I won 2 of them. The one I lost was because my client lied to me about critical facts, and I walked into court unprepared. I will not let that happen again. So I need you to tell me everything, and I mean everything, about your marriage to Thomas Brennan. Every bruise, every threat, every witness, every detail, no matter how small or embarrassing. Can you do that?" Claire straightened her spine, met Eleanor's eyes steadily. "Yes." "Good. Then let's begin." They talked for hours. Eleanor took notes in a rapid shorthand, asking sharp questions, pressing for details, never letting Claire's answers be vague or emotional. She wanted facts, dates, specifics. She wanted the name of every doctor who'd treated Claire, every servant who might have seen something, every business associate who'd been in the house when Thomas lost his temper. Daniel listened from across the room, and with every word Claire spoke, his hatred for Thomas Brennan grew deeper. He heard about the time Thomas had locked Claire in a closet for 2 days for burning his dinner, about the time he'd thrown her down the stairs and then made her attend a dinner party that same evening, smiling on his arm while her ribs screamed with every breath, about the systematic isolation, the way Thomas had driven away every friend Claire had until she had no one to turn to, no one to believe her if she tried to speak. By the time Claire finished, tears were streaming silently down her face, but her voice never wavered. Eleanor set down her pencil, her expression grim. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a strong case emotionally, but legally it's weak. We have no medical records. Thomas made sure of that. We have no witnesses who will testify. They're all in his pocket or too afraid. We have your word against his, and in a territory where women have very few legal rights, that's a difficult position to argue from. So we can't win, Claire said flatly. I didn't say that. I said it's difficult. But here's what we do have. We have you, alive and willing to fight. We have Mr. Wyatt, a respected rancher willing to testify on your behalf. We have Tom Morrison and others in Gardner who've agreed to speak to your character. And we have Thomas Brennan's own reputation. He's powerful, but power makes enemies. I've already started asking questions about him, and what I'm hearing suggests he's not as untouchable as he thinks. What kind of questions? Daniel asked. Eleanor smiled, and there was something predatory in it. The kind that make powerful men nervous. Business dealings that don't quite add up. Contracts won through suspicious means. A pattern of behavior that suggests Thomas Brennan is very good at using the law as a weapon, but perhaps not so good at following it himself. Brennan away from you during the proceedings, and we're going to prepare the strongest case possible in the 3 weeks we have before the judge arrives. What do you need from us? Daniel asked. Everything. I need witnesses who'll speak to Mrs. Brennan's character. I need documentation of every interaction she's had with her husband's men. That confrontation with Ridley in the saloon is gold, by the way. I need proof that she's been living here respectably, not in some illicit arrangement. And Mr. Wyatt, Eleanor fixed him with a hard stare. I need you to be very clear about the nature of your relationship with Mrs. Brennan, because you can bet Thomas Brennan's lawyers are going to claim you're the reason she left, that this is just adultery dressed up as abuse. Claire and I haven't... Daniel felt heat rise in his face. There's nothing improper happening here. I believe you. But a court needs proof, and proving a negative is nearly impossible. So here's what we do. We make your relationship the strength of our case, not the weakness. We argue that Mrs. Brennan fled abuse and found refuge with a good Samaritan. We argue that Mr. Wyatt's actions were heroic, not improper. We paint a picture of two people brought together by circumstances, acting with honor and decency in a situation that demanded both. Will that work? Claire asked. It'll have to. Because the alternative is letting Thomas Brennan's lawyers control the narrative, and I promise you, their narrative will be ugly. Eleanor stood, gathered her papers. I'm staying in Gardner at Tom's place. I'll be back tomorrow to continue preparations. In the meantime, I want both of you to write down everything you can remember about the day you met, the circumstances, every conversation. I want a complete record that shows this relationship has been appropriate and proper from the beginning. After Eleanor left, Daniel and Claire sat at the table, each with paper and pencil, trying to reconstruct that first night in the cabin. It was strange putting those desperate hours into dry legal language, stripping away the emotion and humanity to create a record that would satisfy a court's requirements. Does any of this sound like what really happened? Claire asked after an hour of writing. All these careful words about providing shelter and rendering aid, it doesn't capture what it felt like, how scared I was. How kind you were. How it felt like... She trailed off. Like what? Like being saved. Not just from the cold, but from everything. From a life that had become unbearable. She set down her pencil, looked at him across the table. Daniel, what Eleanor said about proving our relationship has been proper. It has been. I know, but what if... She paused, choosing her words carefully. What if that's not what I want anymore? What if proper and respectable and appropriate aren't enough? Daniel's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Claire, we can't... The trial. If anyone thought we were... I know we have to wait. I know we have to be careful, but after. If we win, if I'm free, if Thomas can't touch me anymore. She reached across the table, took his hand. I'm just saying I want there to be an after. With you. If you want that too. Daniel looked down at their joined hands, at her slender fingers wrapped around his calloused ones, and felt something in his chest expand and break open at the same time. Want didn't begin to cover what he felt, but wanting and having were two different things, separated by a chasm of legal complications and social conventions and a dangerous man who wouldn't let go easily. I want that, he said quietly. More than I've wanted anything in a long time. But Claire, we have to be smart about this. We have to get you free first, clear and legal, so that when, she said firmly, Not if, when. When, he agreed, and the word felt like a promise, like hope, like a future he hadn't dared imagine 3 months ago when he'd been alone in this cabin thinking he'd stay that way forever. They worked through the evening, writing and revising their statements until they had something that satisfied Eleanor's requirements without completely erasing the truth of what had happened between them. It was a delicate balance, acknowledging care and connection without admitting to anything that could be used against them in court. As night fell, and Claire finally went to bed behind her curtain, Daniel sat by the fire and thought about everything that was coming. The trial would be brutal. Eleanor had made that clear. Thomas Brennan would throw every resource he had at destroying them, at painting Claire as an unfaithful wife and Daniel as a homewrecker. The newspapers would have a field day. His reputation, such as it was, would be dragged through the mud, and he didn't care. He'd meant what he told Claire. Some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. She was worth it. The chance at a real future, a real life together, was worth it. Even the possibility of showing other women in similar situations that they didn't have to stay silent, didn't have to accept abuse as their lot in life. That was worth it too. Daniel added another log to the fire, checked that his rifle was loaded and near at hand, and settled into his chair for another night of fitful sleep. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying the last gasps of winter across the Montana plains. Spring was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the slow warming of the days, in the way the snow was starting to melt in the south-facing valleys. Spring, and with it, a trial that would determine everything. Daniel closed his eyes and let himself imagine it. Claire free, the legal chains binding her to Thomas Brennan broken. A wedding, maybe, done proper and legal. A child born into safety and love instead of fear and obligation. Years stretching ahead, filled with ordinary days and quiet happiness. It was a beautiful dream. Whether it could become reality depended on the next few weeks, on a judge's ruling, on whether justice could triumph over money and power and legal manipulation. But for now, in this moment, with Claire sleeping safely a few feet away and the fire warm beside him, Daniel let himself believe it was possible. Let himself believe that sometimes, against all odds, spring really did come, even to those who'd lived through the longest, coldest winters. The 3 weeks before Judge Harrison's arrival passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Eleanor Marsh became a fixture at the ranch, arriving each morning with new questions, new strategies, new concerns about how Thomas Brennan's lawyers might attack their case. She was relentless in her preparation, drilling Claire on her testimony until she could recite the facts of her abuse without breaking down, teaching her how to answer hostile questions without appearing defensive or hysterical. "They'll try to provoke you," Eleanor said during one particularly grueling session. "They'll call you a liar, suggest you're mentally unstable, imply you're an adulteress looking for an excuse to abandon your vows. You have to stay calm no matter what they say. The moment you lose your composure, you play into their narrative of the irrational, emotional woman who can't be trusted." Claire practiced answering the cruelest questions Eleanor could devise, and Daniel sat nearby, his hands clenched into fists, hating every moment of it, but understanding its necessity. This was war, and Eleanor was training them for battle. Meanwhile, Thomas Brennan wasn't idle. Reports filtered back through Tom Morrison's network of contacts. Thomas had hired not one, but 3 lawyers, the best legal minds in Helena. He was telling anyone who'd listen that his poor, disturbed wife had been kidnapped by a rancher with dishonorable intentions, that he was desperate to bring her home where she could receive proper medical care for her delusions. He was painting himself as the concerned husband, the victim of circumstances, the wronged party. It made Daniel's blood boil, but Eleanor just nodded grimly when she heard the reports. "Good. Let him overplay his hand. The more he talks, the more chances he gives us to catch him in inconsistencies." 2 weeks before the trial, a package arrived at the ranch, delivered by a nervous courier who wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes. Inside was a legal document, a petition from Thomas Brennan requesting the court to order Claire's immediate return to Helena pending the trial, on grounds that she was mentally incompetent and a danger to herself. Eleanor read the petition with narrowed eyes, then smiled in a way that made Daniel grateful she was on their side. He's scared. This is the move of a man who knows his case is weak.
He's trying to get her back before the trial can even happen, hoping to intimidate her into dropping the divorce petition. Will it work? Claire asked, her voice tight with fear. Can he force me back? Not if I have anything to say about it. I'm filing a counter motion today, along with a request for a restraining order. We're going to make sure Thomas Brennan doesn't get within 100 yards of you until this trial is over. But that night, after Eleanor had ridden back to town, Claire couldn't sleep. Daniel found her standing by the window at midnight, staring out at the dark landscape, one hand protectively over her belly. Talk to me, he said softly, coming to stand beside her. I'm scared, Daniel. More scared than I've been since the day I ran. What if the judge rules in Thomas's favor? What if he orders me back to Helena? I can't go back. I can't. You won't have to. You don't know that. I know that I won't let it happen. If the worst comes to pass, if the judge rules against us, then we run. We take the horses and we disappear into the territories where Thomas can't follow. We start over somewhere he'll never find us. She turned to look at him, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. You'd do that? Give up everything? This ranch? Your home? Your whole life? Just to keep me safe? In a heartbeat. That's not fair to you. Life's not about fair, Claire. It's about choosing what matters and fighting for it. You matter. That baby matters. He placed his hand gently over hers, both of them touching her belly where new life was growing. This matters. Everything else is just property and geography. We can find those things anywhere. But this, what we have, that's worth protecting. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried quietly against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, two people bound together by circumstance and choice, facing an uncertain future with nothing but determination and each other. The night before Judge Harrison was due to arrive in Gardner, Daniel rode out to check the far fence line, needing the space to think, to prepare himself for what was coming. The day was warm for early April, the snow melting in rushing streams that would feed the rivers and turn the brown landscape green, life returning after winter's long siege. He was on his way back to the ranch when he saw the rider approaching from the south. For a moment his hand went to his rifle, thinking it might be more of Thomas's men. But as the rider drew closer, Daniel recognized the worn cavalry coat and grizzled face of Jim Parker, an old friend from his Army days who'd settled in Virginia City after the war. "Jim," Daniel called out as they met on the road. "What brings you all the way out here?" Jim pulled his horse alongside Prophet, his expression grave. "Came to warn you, Dan. There's talk all over the territory about this divorce trial, about you and some woman you're harboring. Brennan's been spreading his version of events everywhere, got people stirred up. Let them talk. We've got the truth on our side. Truth doesn't always win against money and influence. You know that." Jim leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But that's not the main reason I rode out here. I heard something in Virginia City, something you need to know. Brennan's hired more than just lawyers. Word is he's got men coming in from Denver, not law enforcement, not witnesses. Guns for hire." Daniel felt ice form in his gut. "You're sure?" "Sure enough to ride 3 days to tell you. These aren't local boys, Dan. These are professionals. The kind who'll do whatever they're paid to do and disappear before anyone can prove they were involved. When are they supposed to arrive?" "Could be here already for all I know. I heard about it 2 days ago." Jim gripped Daniel's arm. "You need to be careful, real careful. Brennan might be planning something during the trial or right after. Either way, you and that woman are in danger." After Jim left, Daniel rode back to the ranch with his mind racing. He should tell Claire about this new threat, should warn her that the danger had escalated beyond legal battles into potential violence. But when he walked into the cabin and saw her humming softly as she prepared supper, saw the first real peace she'd had in her face in weeks, he couldn't bring himself to shatter it. Not tonight. Tonight, let her have peace. Tomorrow would bring enough fear. They ate supper in companionable silence, and afterward Claire brought out a shirt she'd been mending for him, working by lamplight while Daniel cleaned his rifle for the dozenth time. It was domestic and comfortable and everything Daniel had forgotten he wanted during his 7 years alone. "I've been thinking," Claire said after a while, not looking up from her sewing. "About names." "Names?" "For the baby. If it's a girl, I was thinking maybe Margaret.
After your wife. If that's not too strange or painful for you. Daniel set down his rifle, something warm and bright expanding in his chest. That's not strange. That's generous. Margaret would have liked you, I think. She had a soft spot for people who refused to give up, who kept fighting even when everything was against them. Was she like that? In her own way. She fought pneumonia for 4 days, fought to stay alive right up until the end. The doctor said most people would have died in 2. He smiled, remembering. She was small, like you, but tough as iron underneath. I hope I can be that strong. When the baby comes, when everything gets harder. You're already that strong. You left an abusive husband in the middle of winter with nothing but a wagon and hope. That takes more courage than most people have in their whole lives. She finally looked up from her sewing, tears bright in her eyes. Why do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. I just say what's true. She set aside her sewing, crossed to where he sat, and did something she'd never done before. She climbed into his lap, curling against him like a child seeking comfort. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, careful of her growing belly, and held her close. I'm scared about tomorrow, she whispered. Scared of facing Thomas. Scared of what the judge will decide. Scared that this small happiness we've found will be taken away before we've barely had a chance to live it. I know. I'm scared too. You are? You never seem scared. I'm terrified. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of failing to protect you when you need me most. Terrified that I'll let you down. He rested his chin on top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. But being scared doesn't mean we don't fight. It just means what we're fighting for matters. Promise me something, Claire said. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what the judge decides or what Thomas tries to do, you won't do anything foolish. You won't throw your life away trying to save me. Claire, promise me, Daniel, please. Because I couldn't bear it if you died because of me. I couldn't live with that. Daniel wanted to promise, wanted to ease her fears, but he couldn't lie to her. I promise to do everything in my power to keep us both alive and together. That's all I can promise. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded against his chest. I suppose that'll have to be enough. They sat like that until the fire burned low and the night grew cold, neither wanting to move, neither wanting to let go of this moment of peace before the storm. Finally, Daniel carried Claire to bed, something he'd never done before, a crossing of the invisible line they'd maintained between them, and tucked her in with all the blankets. Stay, she said, catching his hand as he turned to go. Please, just for tonight, I don't want to be alone. Daniel hesitated only a moment before climbing into the bed beside her, both of them still fully clothed, maintaining that last thread of propriety even as they gave in to the need for closeness, for comfort, for the simple human connection of not being alone in the dark. He held her while she slept, listening to her breathing, feeling the slight movements of the baby between them, and let himself imagine a future where this was normal, where they could share a bed and a life without fear or shame or legal complications. Dawn came too soon, as it always did. Daniel rose quietly, built up the fire, made coffee. Eleanor arrived while they were eating breakfast, her face set in determined lines. Today's the day. Judge Harrison arrived in town last night, heard he's already set up court in the Gardner Community Hall. Trial starts at 10 o'clock. She looked between Daniel and Claire. Are you ready? No, Claire said honestly, but we're doing it anyway. Good. That's the spirit. Eleanor pulled out her papers, did one last review of their strategy. Remember, Claire, calm, factual, detailed, but not emotional. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. If Thomas's lawyers try to rattle you, take a breath before answering. Show the judge you're rational, controlled, capable of making your own decisions. They rode into Gardner as a group, Daniel, Claire, and Eleanor, arriving to find the town more crowded than Daniel had ever seen it. Word of the trial had spread, drawing spectators from miles around. Some were genuinely interested in justice, but others, Daniel knew, had come for the spectacle, for the entertainment of watching a powerful man's private life exposed in public. The community hall was packed, every bench filled, people standing along the walls.
At the front, Judge Harrison sat behind a makeshift bench, a gray-haired man with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades riding circuit through rough country. His eyes were sharp and assessing as Daniel and Claire entered. On the left side of the room sat Thomas Brennan with his 3 lawyers, all dressed in expensive suits that screamed money and power. Daniel saw Thomas for the first time, a handsome man in his 40s with carefully groomed dark hair and the kind of face that looked trustworthy, respectable, exactly the sort of man you'd expect to be a pillar of the community. He looked nothing like a monster, which was, Daniel realized, exactly how monsters operated. Thomas's eyes fixed on Claire the moment she entered, and even from across the room, Daniel could see her flinch. He took her arm, a gesture of support and protection, and guided her to their seats on the right side. Eleanor arranged her papers while Daniel tried to ignore the whispers and stares from the crowd. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, calling the room to order. "We're here today for the matter of Brennan versus Brennan, a petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Claire Brennan on grounds of extreme cruelty. This is a serious matter, and I expect everyone in this courtroom to conduct themselves with appropriate decorum." His gaze swept the crowd, settling briefly on a group of rough-looking men Daniel didn't recognize. Jim's words echoed in his mind, guns for hire. Thomas's lead lawyer, a slick-looking man named Whitmore, stood first. "Your Honor, before we proceed with this farcical petition, we have a counter-petition requesting the immediate return of Mrs. Brennan to her husband's custody on grounds of mental incompetence. We have medical testimony that Mrs. Brennan suffers from hysteria and delusions, that she's not capable of making rational decisions about her own welfare." Eleanor rose smoothly. "Your Honor, this is nothing but an attempt to intimidate my client and prevent her from exercising her legal right to petition for divorce. We vigorously oppose any motion that would force Mrs. Brennan back into the custody of the man she's accusing of sustained and brutal abuse." "I'll hear arguments on the counter-petition first," Judge Harrison said. "Mr. Whitmore, present your evidence." What followed was an hour of character assassination disguised as legal argument. Whitmore brought forward a doctor from Helena who'd examined Claire once, 2 years ago, and who now testified that she'd shown signs of nervous disorder and emotional instability. He brought forward a priest who said Thomas was a devoted husband and churchgoer. He painted a picture of a troubled woman married to a saint, a woman whose own mental illness had caused her to fabricate stories of abuse to justify abandoning her marital duties. Through it all, Claire sat rigid beside Daniel, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Daniel wanted to reach over to take her hand, but Eleanor had warned them about any displays of intimacy in court. Thomas's lawyers would use it as evidence of an improper relationship. When it was Eleanor's turn, she stood with the confidence of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "Your Honor, the defense's argument rests entirely on the testimony of paid professionals. A doctor who examined Mrs. Brennan once for a minor illness. A priest who knows Mr. Brennan only through his public persona. What they haven't provided is any evidence that Mrs. Brennan is currently incompetent. She fled her home 3 months ago, survived a deadly blizzard, has been living independently and managing her own affairs since then. Does that sound like an incompetent person to you?" "Objection," Whitmore called. "Mrs. Brennan has been living with Mr. Wyatt, hardly independently. She's been residing at Mr. Wyatt's ranch, yes, but maintaining her own space, making her own decisions, assisting with ranch work. Mr. Wyatt can testify that she's been entirely rational and capable throughout her stay." Judge Harrison held up a hand for silence. "I'll make my ruling on the counter-petition now. Based on the evidence presented, I see no grounds for declaring Mrs. Brennan incompetent. The counter-petition is denied. We'll proceed with the divorce hearing." He looked at Thomas, whose face had gone dark with suppressed rage. "However, I am granting a temporary restraining order. Mr. Brennan, you are to stay at least 50 feet away from Mrs. Brennan at all times during these proceedings. Is that clear?" "Perfectly, Your Honor," Thomas said, his voice smooth as silk. But his eyes, when they fixed on Claire, promised violence. The divorce hearing itself began after a short recess. Eleanor called Claire to testify first, walking her through the history of her marriage in careful detail. Claire's voice remained steady as she described the progression of abuse, the small cruelties at first, the verbal attacks that gradually escalated to physical violence. She spoke about broken ribs, black eyes hidden with powder,
bruises covered by long sleeves. "And did you ever seek help?" Eleanor asked. "Did you tell anyone what was happening?" "I tried. 3 times. The first time I went to our family doctor. He examined me, saw the bruises, and told me that marital difficulties were common and I should try to be a better wife. The second time I went to our priest. He said marriage was sacred, that I needed to pray harder and submit to my husband's authority. The third time, I went to the sheriff. He laughed and said, 'A man's got a right to discipline his wife as he sees fit.'" A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Harrison's expression was unreadable, but he was taking notes. Whitmore's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned every detail of Claire's testimony, suggested she was exaggerating minor incidents, implied she was covering up her own failings as a wife. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Brennan, that you were often disobedient, that you failed to maintain your household properly, that you gave your husband cause for frustration?" "I tried to be a good wife," Claire said, her voice tight but controlled. "I cooked and cleaned and did everything he asked. It was never enough. Or perhaps you're simply a difficult woman making excuses for your own shortcomings." "Objection," Eleanor said sharply. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained. Mr. Whitmore, stick to questions, not commentary." But the damage was done. Daniel could see doubt on some faces in the crowd, could see people whispering behind their hands. This was exactly what Eleanor had warned them about. The court of public opinion was as important as the legal one, and right now, Thomas's lawyers were winning. When Claire finally stepped down, she was shaking with exhaustion and suppressed emotion. Daniel wanted to go to her, but Eleanor caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Not yet. Any comfort now would look like inappropriate intimacy. Eleanor called Daniel next. He took the stand and swore to tell the truth, his hand steady on the Bible despite his racing heart. "Mr. Wyatt, please tell the court how you met Mrs. Brennan." Daniel described finding Claire in the snow, nearly dead from exposure, bringing her back to his cabin and saving her life. He spoke carefully, sticking to the facts, making it clear that his actions had been those of any decent person helping someone in desperate need. "And what has been the nature of your relationship with Mrs. Brennan since that day?" "Friendship, mutual support. She's been staying at my ranch as a guest, in her own quarters, helping with chores in exchange for room and board. Everything has been proper and appropriate." Whitmore's cross-examination was designed to suggest otherwise. "Mr. Wyatt, you're a widower, correct? Living alone for 7 years before Mrs. Brennan arrived?" "Yes." "Must have been lonely, all that time by yourself. Convenient, then, when a young woman appeared on your doorstep." "It wasn't convenient. It was a medical emergency. She was dying." "But you kept her there for 3 months. A married woman living in your home, sharing your meals, your space. Are you really asking this court to believe nothing improper occurred?" "I'm not asking. I'm telling. Nothing improper occurred." "You expect us to believe that a healthy man and a young woman living in close quarters for months maintained perfect propriety? That you never touched her, never kissed her, never—" "That's exactly what I expect you to believe because it's the truth," Daniel said, his voice hard. "Mrs. Brennan was fleeing abuse. She was pregnant with another man's child. She was terrified and traumatized. Taking advantage of her in that state would have made me no better than the man she was running from. So no, nothing improper happened because I'm not that kind of man." The courtroom was silent. Even Whitmore seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Harrison was watching Daniel with an expression that might have been approval. "No further questions," Whitmore finally said, sitting down with a tight smile that suggested he'd gotten what he wanted anyway, the seed of doubt planted in everyone's minds. Eleanor called Tom Morrison next, then the miner who'd stood up in the saloon, then 2 women from Gardner who testified to Claire's good character during her time in town. Each one chipped away at Thomas's narrative, building a picture of a woman who was rational, capable, and genuinely fleeing danger rather than fabricating stories. Then it was Thomas's turn to testify. He took the stand with the bearing of a man used to being believed, used to being respected. His performance was masterful, the concerned husband, bewildered by his wife's accusations, heartbroken that she would make such terrible claims against him. "I love Claire," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've always loved her. Yes, we've had our difficulties. What marriage doesn't? But I have never raised a hand to her in anger. These accusations are devastating. I don't know what's happened to my wife, what's poisoned her mind against me, but I want her to know that I forgive her. I want her to come home where she belongs. It was a good performance. Daniel could see people in the crowd softening toward Thomas, could see the sympathy on their faces. This was what made men like Thomas Brennan dangerous. They were so good at playing the victim, at making others believe their lies. Eleanor's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Brennan, you say you've never hit your wife, but you have struck employees, haven't you? There are records of complaints filed against you for assault. Business disputes that were resolved. Resolved by you paying the complainants to drop charges. That's not the same as being innocent. Eleanor pulled out papers. I have depositions from 3 former employees describing incidents where you physically attacked them over minor disagreements. If you're capable of violence against employees, why should we believe you're incapable of violence against your wife? That's completely different. Is it? Or is it a pattern of behavior? A pattern of using physical force to control people who displease you? Thomas's composure cracked slightly, anger flashing in his eyes. You're twisting things. Those men were thieves, incompetents. So they deserved to be hit? I never said... But you did hit them, didn't you, Mr. Brennan? You have a temper. You use violence to solve problems. And when your wife displeased you, you treated her the same way you treated those employees. No! Thomas was on his feet, his face flushed with rage. That's a lie. Claire is making this up, probably at the suggestion of her lover. He pointed at Daniel. Who wants to steal my wife for himself? Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Mr. Brennan, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. Thomas sat down, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and for just a moment everyone in that courtroom had seen the anger underneath, the violence barely contained. Eleanor had gotten exactly what she wanted. The trial continued for 2 more days. Witnesses for both sides testified. Medical experts argued about whether Claire's described injuries were consistent with abuse or could have other causes. Character witnesses praised Thomas's reputation, while others whispered about his temper, his gambling, his tendency to make enemies. Through it all, Claire sat with rigid composure, answering every question, enduring every insinuation, never breaking down despite the obvious toll it was taking. Daniel watched her with a mixture of pride and pain, wishing he could spare her this ordeal, knowing he couldn't. On the 3rd day, Judge Harrison called for closing arguments. Whitmore went first, painting Claire as a troubled woman who'd fabricated abuse to justify abandoning her marriage. He suggested Daniel had manipulated her, taken advantage of her vulnerability, convinced her to make false accusations to free herself for an adulterous relationship. Then Eleanor stood. Her voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the packed hall. Your Honor, members of this community who've come to witness these proceedings, I want you to think about something. Mr. Brennan's lawyers have spent 3 days trying to destroy Claire Brennan's credibility. They've called her hysterical, delusional, manipulative, unfaithful. But what they haven't done, what they can't do, is explain away the fear in her eyes every time she looks at her husband. They can't explain why a woman would give up everything she owned, risk death in a blizzard, choose homelessness and uncertainty over returning to her marriage. They can't explain why multiple witnesses have come forward describing Thomas Brennan's temper and tendency toward violence. Eleanor paused, letting her words sink in. The defense wants you to believe this is about a man's right to his wife, about the sanctity of marriage, about proper social order. But what this is really about is power. Thomas Brennan is a powerful man used to getting what he wants, and what he wants is control over a woman who dared to say no. Well, I'm here to tell you that no amount of money, no amount of social standing, no amount of legal maneuvering gives any man the right to terrorize his wife. Claire Brennan did nothing wrong. She survived. And survival is not a crime. The courtroom was silent when Eleanor sat down. Judge Harrison gathered his papers, his expression grave. This court will take a 1-hour recess while I consider my ruling. When we reconvene, I'll deliver my decision. He banged his gavel, and the room erupted in conversation. That hour was the longest of Daniel's life. He, Claire, and Eleanor waited in a small room at the back of the hall, none of them able to eat or even talk much. Claire paced like a caged animal, one hand constantly on her belly, protecting the child that would need a stable future regardless of how the judge ruled. "What do you think?" Daniel finally asked Eleanor. "What are our chances?" Eleanor's expression was unreadable. Harrison's a fair judge, by reputation, but fair doesn't always mean sympathetic to women's rights. He could rule that Claire hasn't proven her case sufficiently. He could rule that marriage vows supersede personal safety. He could rule that she belongs to Thomas by law regardless of how Thomas treated her. She paused. Or he could surprise us. We'll know soon enough. When the hour was up, they filed back into the courtroom. The crowd had grown even larger, people pushing in from outside, standing on tiptoes to see. Judge Harrison sat at his bench, his face grave, a single sheet of paper in front of him. "I've given this case considerable thought," he began. "The law regarding marriage and divorce in this territory is complex, and there are compelling arguments on both sides. However, I must rule based not just on legal precedent, but on justice and common sense." Daniel felt Claire's hand find his under the table, squeezing tight. He squeezed back, both of them barely breathing. After hearing 3 days of testimony, I find myself faced with two competing narratives. On one side, we have Thomas Brennan, a successful businessman, a respected member of his community, a man with every social advantage. On the other side, we have Claire Brennan, a woman with nothing but her word and her willingness to risk everything to escape her marriage. Judge Harrison paused, his eyes moving between Thomas and Claire. "The question before me is simple. Who do I believe?" The silence was absolute. "I believe Claire Brennan," Judge Harrison said quietly. "I believe her because no woman gives up security, comfort, and social respectability without profound reason. I believe her because her fear is real and evident. I believe her because multiple witnesses have testified to Thomas Brennan's capacity for violence. And I believe her because in my 30 years on the bench, I've learned to recognize truth when I hear it, and I heard truth in her testimony." Thomas was on his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't—" "Sit down, Mr. Brennan, or I'll have you removed." Judge Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "I hereby grant Claire Brennan's petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. The marriage between Thomas Brennan and Claire Brennan is dissolved, effective immediately. Mrs. Brennan is awarded her personal property and is granted a permanent restraining order against Mr. Brennan, who is prohibited from approaching or contacting her for any reason. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mrs. Brennan financial compensation in the amount of $500 to assist with her transition to independent life." The courtroom exploded. People were shouting, some in approval, others in outrage. Daniel heard Thomas roaring protests, heard his lawyers arguing over the noise. But through it all, Daniel's attention was fixed on Claire, who had collapsed in her chair, sobbing with relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming weight of finally being free. Eleanor was smiling, actually smiling, something Daniel hadn't seen her do once in 3 weeks. "We won," she said, as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. "We actually won." Daniel pulled Claire into his arms, not caring any more about propriety or appearances. She clung to him, shaking, and he held her while she cried out 3 years of fear and pain and desperate hope. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's over. You're free." "Free?" she repeated, testing the word like something precious and fragile. "I'm free." But even in that moment of triumph, Daniel's eyes found Thomas Brennan across the room, and what he saw there chilled him to the bone. Thomas was staring at Claire with undiluted hatred, his hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with rage. This wasn't a man accepting defeat. This was a man planning revenge. The guns for hire Jim had warned about, they were still out there somewhere, still on Thomas's payroll. The legal battle might be won, but Daniel had a terrible feeling the real fight was just beginning. They left the courthouse through the back door, Eleanor insisting on caution despite the celebration happening inside. The restraining order was legal and binding, but paper didn't stop bullets, and Daniel wasn't taking any chances. He kept Claire close, his hand never far from his gun, his eyes scanning the crowded street for threats. Tom Morrison met them outside with 3 horses already saddled. "Figured you'd want to get out of town quick. There's a crowd forming, and not all of them are friendly. Some of Brennan's men have been making noise about the judge being corrupt, about this being an outrage against decent society." "Let them talk," Eleanor said, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "Talk is all they can legally do now." Legal and what actually happens are two different things out here, Tom said. He looked at Daniel. You armed? Always. Good. I'd suggest not going straight back to the ranch. Take the long way. Make sure no one's following. And Daniel? Tom's expression was grim. Sleep with one eye open for the next few weeks. Men like Brennan don't take losing well. They rode out of Gardner as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the melting snow. Daniel kept Claire between him and Eleanor, both of them watching their back trail. The landscape was awakening from winter. Green shoots pushing through brown earth, streams running high with snowmelt, the air carrying the scent of sage and pine and promise. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like the beginning of something good. Instead, Daniel felt the weight of vigilance settling on his shoulders, the awareness that winning in court didn't mean winning in life. They were 2 miles from town when Daniel heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats behind them, coming fast. He pulled Prophet to a stop, turned in his saddle. 3 riders, maybe 4, pushing their horses hard in pursuit. Go, Daniel said to Eleanor. Get Claire back to the ranch. Don't stop. Don't look back. Daniel, no, Claire started, but Eleanor was already grabbing her horse's reins, kicking her own mount into a gallop. Trust him, Eleanor shouted over the thunder of hooves. He knows what he's doing. Daniel watched them disappear over a rise, then turned to face the approaching riders. His rifle was in his hands, loaded and ready. If this was how Thomas wanted to play it, ignoring the judge's order, sending men after Claire before the ink was even dry on the divorce papers, then Daniel would show him exactly what that kind of lawlessness earned. The riders pulled up 50 feet away, and Daniel recognized 2 of them from the courtroom, part of the rough group that had been sitting with Thomas's lawyers. The third was Ridley, his face expressionless as always. This is a mistake, Daniel called out. The judge ruled. It's over. Turn around and ride back to Helena while you still can. Ridley urged his horse a few steps closer. Mr. Brennan doesn't accept the ruling. He's filing appeals, bringing in territorial judges, whatever it takes to overturn it. In the meantime, he wants his wife back. She's not his wife anymore. And she's not going anywhere with you? You're 1 man, Wyatt. We're 3. You planning on shooting all of us before we get you? If I have to. Daniel's voice was flat, cold. But here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking you boys are hired guns, not fools. You're getting paid to do a job, but are you getting paid enough to die for it? Because that's what'll happen if you try to take her. I'll kill at least 1 of you, probably 2 before you get me. Maybe all 3 if I'm lucky. So ask yourselves, is Thomas Brennan's money worth being the one I kill first? The 2 hired guns exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. But Ridley's expression never changed. You're bluffing. You won't risk leaving her unprotected. Try me. They stared at each other across 50 feet of muddy ground, and Daniel saw the moment Ridley made his decision, the moment his hand started toward his gun. Daniel fired. The shot cracked across the landscape, echoing off the mountains. Daniel had aimed for Ridley's shoulder, meant to wound, not kill, but the man jerked at the last second and the bullet caught him high in the chest instead. Ridley fell from his horse with a cry of pain and surprise. The other 2 men had their guns out now, but neither was firing. They were staring at their fallen companion, at Daniel with his rifle already reloaded and aimed, at the blood spreading across Ridley's shirt. Next one's between your eyes, Daniel said quietly. Your choice. Die here for money or ride away and live to spend it. The men holstered their guns slowly, carefully. One of them dismounted, helped Ridley, who was cursing through gritted teeth, back onto his horse. The wound wasn't fatal, Daniel saw with relief. Painful, definitely, but Ridley would survive if they got him to a doctor. This isn't over, one of the hired guns said as they turned their horses. Yes, it is, Daniel replied. Tell Thomas Brennan that if he sends anyone else after Claire, next time I won't aim for the shoulder. Tell him the judge ruled, the law is settled, and if he can't accept that, then he's the one breaking the law. Tell him to let her go and move on with his life. They rode away. Ridley slumped over his saddle, the other 2 supporting him on either side. Daniel watched until they were specks in the distance, then kicked Prophet into a run, racing to catch up with Claire and Eleanor. He found them a mile from the ranch, Eleanor holding a rifle while Claire sat her horse with wide, frightened eyes. When she saw Daniel approaching, alone and unharmed, she nearly fell from the saddle in her rush to get to him. "I heard a shot," she said, her hands running over him, checking for wounds. "I heard shooting and I thought, I'm fine. They're gone." He caught her hands, held them still. "I wounded one of them, sent them all running. They won't be back." "You shot Ridley?" Eleanor asked, and there was something like approval in her voice. "He was going for his gun. It was self-defense." "Good. That makes it legal. And it sends a message to Brennan that you're not an easy target." Eleanor looked toward the ranch, calculating. "Still, I'd recommend you both stay alert. File a report with the territorial marshal about the attack. Get it on record. Build a paper trail showing Brennan's continued harassment despite the court order." They rode the last mile in silence, all of them processing what had happened, what it meant. The victory in court felt more fragile now, more tenuous. Thomas Brennan had money, influence, and apparently the willingness to ignore legal rulings when they didn't suit him. This fight was far from over. But when they reached the ranch and Daniel helped Claire down from her horse, when he saw the way the evening light caught in her hair and the relief in her eyes at being home, he felt something settle in his chest. This place, this woman, this life they were trying to build, it was worth fighting for, worth defending, worth whatever price might still be demanded. That night, after Eleanor had ridden back to Gardner and promised to return in a few days to help with the marshal's report, Daniel and Claire sat by the fire and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 days of trial, a ruling that changed everything, an attempted kidnapping, a shooting. It was too much to absorb all at once. "Are you sorry?" Claire asked suddenly. "Sorry you pulled me out of that snow? Sorry you got tangled up in all this mess?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who'd survived abuse and blizzards and a brutal public trial. At the strength in her eyes, the steel underneath the softness. At the way she rested her hand protectively over her growing belly, already fierce in defending the child who would need that fierceness. "Not for a second," he said. "You gave me something I didn't even know I'd lost. A reason to care. A reason to fight. A reason to want tomorrow." That's a lot of weight to put on one person. You can handle it. You've been handling weight no one should have to carry for years. This is different. This is the good kind of weight, the kind that comes from choosing to care about someone. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Daniel, I need to tell you something about what happens now, about us." His heart kicked hard against his ribs. "All right. I'm free now, legally free. The divorce is final. Thomas has no claim on me anymore. Which means..." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears and something that might have been hope. "Which means I can make my own choices about where I live, who I love, what kind of life I want to build." "And what do you want?" "I want this, you, this ranch, a life where I wake up without fear and go to sleep knowing I'm safe. I want to raise my baby here, in this place where you saved my life, where I learned what it means to be treated with kindness instead of cruelty." She took a shaking breath. "I want you, Daniel Wyatt, if you'll have me. Not because I need rescuing, not because I'm grateful, but because somewhere in these last few months, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying. Daniel had known this moment was coming, had felt it building since that first night when he'd pulled her from the snow. But hearing it spoken out loud, having it be real instead of just possibility, made his chest tight with emotion he barely knew how to name. "You don't have to love me," Claire added quickly, misreading his silence. "I know it's too fast. I know the circumstances were strange. I know there's the baby to think about and all the complications." "Too late," Daniel said, the words coming out rough with feeling. "Way too late for that. I already do." She stared at him. "You do?" "I love you, Claire. Have for a while now, if I'm being honest. Probably since the moment you woke up in my bed and your first thought was to worry about being trouble for me instead of worrying about yourself. Maybe even before that when I found you in the snow and something in my chest cracked open for the first time in 7 years. Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because you were married. Because you were vulnerable and scared and I didn't want to take advantage. Because I wanted you to be free, really free, before I said anything that might complicate your situation. He moved closer, took her hands. But you're free now. And I'm free. And if you want this, want us, then there's nothing stopping us anymore. She was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. Nothing except Thomas's threat to destroy you. Nothing except the possibility that he'll keep sending men, keep finding ways to hurt us. Nothing except... Nothing that matters, Daniel interrupted gently. Claire, I'm not afraid of Thomas Brennan. I'm not afraid of what he might do or what it might cost me. The only thing I'm afraid of is losing you, and I'll fight with everything I have to make sure that doesn't happen. You already shot a man for me today, and I'd do it again tomorrow if needed. Hell, I'd shoot 10 men if that's what it took to keep you safe. She laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy mixed with disbelief. You're insane. You know that? Probably, but I'm your kind of insane. Yes, she said softly, you are. They kissed then, properly and thoroughly, no more holding back, no more careful distance maintained for propriety's sake. This was a kiss that tasted like freedom and promise, and all the tomorrows they'd fought so hard to win. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Claire rested her forehead against his. So what happens now? She asked. Do we just live? Build a life together? Pretend everything's normal? We don't pretend anything. We live carefully. We stay alert for threats, but we also let ourselves be happy. We've earned that, Claire. We fought for it, bled for it, survived for it. Now we get to actually have it. Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. They filed reports with the territorial marshal about the attempted kidnapping, providing witness statements from Eleanor and documenting Ridley's wound as evidence of the attack. The marshal promised to investigate, though Daniel suspected Thomas's money would make that investigation difficult. Meanwhile, spring continued its inexorable arrival. The snow melted completely, revealing brown earth that quickly turned green. Daniel planted a garden while Claire watched, offering advice based on her mother's teaching about herbs and vegetables. They repaired winter damage to the fences and buildings, the work made lighter by having 2 sets of hands instead of 1. Claire's pregnancy became more visible, her belly rounding as the baby grew. Daniel found himself fascinated by the changes in her body, by the way she'd place his hand on her stomach so he could feel the baby kick. It wasn't his child by blood, but he'd decided weeks ago that biology didn't matter. This baby would be his in every way that counted, loved, protected, raised with kindness instead of cruelty. They talked about getting married, about making their relationship official and legal, but Eleanor cautioned them to wait a few months, to let the dust settle from the divorce, to avoid giving Thomas any ammunition for claiming the divorce had been motivated by adultery. It was frustrating, having to wait when they both knew what they wanted, but wisdom won out over impatience. 6 weeks after the trial, Tom Morrison rode out to the ranch with news. Brennan's gone, he said without preamble. Left Helena 3 days ago, destination unknown. Closed up his house, sold his freight business, just disappeared. Daniel felt Claire tense beside him. Do you think he's coming here? Can't say for certain, but I thought you should know. Be extra careful for a while. Keep your guns close. A man who'd give up everything and disappear, that's either a man running away from his problems or a man getting ready to do something desperate. They spent the next week in a state of heightened alert, taking turns on watch at night, never venturing far from the ranch house without being armed. But no attack came. No riders appeared on the horizon. Life continued its steady rhythm of work and meals and the small intimacies of 2 people building a life together. Then, on a warm evening in late May when the sun was setting gold and pink behind the mountains, Claire went into labor. It started with a sharp pain that made her gasp and double over while she was preparing supper. Daniel was at her side in an instant, his face going white with fear. The baby? He asked. It's time. Claire's voice was tight with pain and anticipation. Daniel, it's time. He'd prepared for this moment, had supplies ready, had even convinced the midwife from Gardner to stay at the ranch for the last 2 weeks of Claire's pregnancy. But Mrs. Henderson had gone back to town 3 days ago, certain the baby wouldn't come for at least another week. I'll ride for Mrs. Henderson, Daniel said, already moving toward the door. No time. Claire gripped his arm.
It's coming fast, Daniel. I can feel it. You're going to have to help me. I don't know how. I've delivered calves and foals, but never a human baby. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together. She managed a strained smile. We've faced worse than this, haven't we? So Daniel helped Claire to the bed, brought water and clean linens, tried to remember everything Margaret had told him years ago about her sister's childbirth. It was terrifying and messy and beautiful all at once, watching Claire labor through the pain, watching her body work to bring new life into the world. Hours passed. Night fell outside the cabin windows, but inside there was only lamplight and Claire's strained breathing and Daniel's murmured words of encouragement. He held her hand when the contractions came, wiped sweat from her forehead, whispered that she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. I can't, Claire sobbed at one point, exhausted and overwhelmed. Daniel, I can't, it's too much. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. You survived Thomas Brennan. You survived a blizzard. You survived a trial. You can survive this too. Just a little longer, love. Just hold on. And she did. Just after midnight, with a final push and a cry that was half pain and half triumph, Claire brought her daughter into the world. Daniel caught the baby in shaking hands, this tiny, perfect human with her mother's dark hair, and a cry that filled the cabin with sound and life and promise. He cleaned her carefully, wrapped her in the soft blanket Claire had spent weeks sewing, and placed her in her mother's arms. Claire was crying, laughing, staring down at her daughter with an expression of such pure love it made Daniel's chest ache. She's beautiful, Claire whispered. She's perfect. She's a fighter, just like her mother. Margaret, Claire said suddenly, looking up at Daniel. I want to name her Margaret, after your first wife, after the woman who would have understood what it means to fight for the right to live freely. Daniel felt tears burning his eyes, the first time he'd cried since Margaret's death 7 years ago. She would have loved that. She would have loved you. They sat together on the bed, the three of them, Daniel, Claire, and baby Margaret, and watched the sunrise through the cabin window. Gold and pink light spilled across the Montana landscape, illuminating a world reborn from winter's grip. Outside, birds were singing, the first real warmth of summer was in the air, and everything felt possible. For 3 days, they existed in a bubble of exhaustion and joy, learning how to care for this tiny new life. Daniel discovered muscles he didn't know he had, that ached from walking a crying baby at 3 a.m. Claire learned to nurse while dozing, too tired to fully wake, but too devoted to let her daughter go hungry. They took turns sleeping, took turns watching over Margaret, took turns marveling at the miracle of her existence. On the 4th day, everything changed. Daniel was outside chopping wood while Claire and the baby napped inside. The afternoon was warm and peaceful, the kind of day that made him think maybe, just maybe, they'd actually won. Maybe Thomas had given up. Maybe they really could build a life here without constantly looking over their shoulders. Then he saw the smoke. It was rising from the direction of Gardner, a black column against the blue sky that spoke of fire, of destruction, of something very wrong. Daniel dropped his axe and ran for the cabin, his heart pounding with sudden dread. Claire was awake when he burst through the door, the baby in her arms, her eyes wide with alarm at his expression. What's wrong? Fire in Gardner. Big one by the look of the smoke. I need to go help. The whole town could burn if they don't get it under control. Then go. We'll be fine here. Claire, I don't like leaving you alone, not with Daniel. She stood, came to him, kissed him firmly. We'll be fine. The town needs you. Go. He hesitated only a moment more, then grabbed his hat and rifle. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me or Tom Morrison. I'll be back as soon as I can. The ride to Gardner took 20 minutes at a hard gallop, and with every passing moment, Daniel's sense of foreboding grew. This fire, coming now, after weeks of quiet, it couldn't be coincidence. As he crested the last hill and saw the town spread out below, his worst fears were confirmed. The fire was contained to one building, the courthouse where the trial had been held, or what was left of it. The structure was fully engulfed, flames leaping high into the air, people forming bucket brigades to wet down the surrounding buildings and prevent the fire from spreading. Daniel joined the fight, working alongside his neighbors to contain the blaze.
It took 2 hours to finally bring it under control, by which time the courthouse was nothing but a smoking ruin. Tom Morrison found Daniel in the crowd, his face smudged with soot, his expression grim. This wasn't an accident. Someone said it deliberately. And Daniel, he paused. All the court records were inside. Everything from your trial, the divorce decree, the restraining order, the judge's ruling, it's all gone. Daniel felt ice form in his gut. What does that mean? Legally? I don't know. Eleanor's trying to figure that out now, but without official records. Tom shook his head. It means everything's in question again. Thomas could claim the divorce never happened, that the ruling was invalid, that Claire is still legally his wife. No. The word came out flat, hard. No, that's not happening. We have witnesses. We have our copies of the documents, copies that Brennan's lawyers will challenge as forgeries without the original court records to verify them against. Tom gripped Daniel's shoulder. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but you need to get back to your ranch, get Claire somewhere safe, because if Thomas set this fire, and I'd bet my life he did, then he's not finished. This is just the opening move. Daniel was already running for his horse before Tom finished speaking. He rode back to the ranch faster than he'd ridden in his life, Prophet's hooves tearing up the dirt road, his heart hammering with fear and fury. Let her be safe, he prayed. Let them be safe. Let me get there in time. But even as he prayed, he knew with the sick certainty of someone who'd seen too much violence, survived too many battles. The fire had been a distraction, a way to draw him away from the ranch, away from Claire and the baby. Thomas Brennan was making his final move. Daniel saw the second column of smoke before he saw the ranch. Thinner than the courthouse fire, but unmistakable. Something on his property was burning. He pushed Prophet harder, the stallion giving everything he had, racing toward home and the people who mattered more than anything else in the world. The barn was on fire when Daniel arrived. Flames were consuming the old wood, and he could hear the horses inside screaming in terror. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. The cabin door was open. Standing in that doorway was Thomas Brennan himself, holding baby Margaret in his arms. And inside, Daniel could see Claire on her knees, a gun pointed at her head by one of the hired men from weeks ago. "Welcome home, Wyatt," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "We've been waiting for you." Daniel dismounted slowly, his hands carefully away from his weapons. His mind was racing, calculating odds, looking for openings. The barn was lost. He could hear the timbers starting to give way. His horses would die if he didn't get them out. But that didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except Claire and the baby. "Let them go, Brennan. This is between you and me." "Is it?" Thomas smiled, and there was madness in his eyes, the kind that came from a man who'd lost everything and decided to burn the world down in response. "I don't think so. See, you took something from me, something that was mine, and now I'm going to take something from you." The court ruled, Thomas. Claire isn't yours anymore. She's free. The court records burned today. Funny how that happened. Thomas's smile widened. Without those records, there's no proof the divorce was ever granted, which means Claire is still my wife, still my property, and this, he jostled the baby, making her cry, is mine too. "She's not yours," Claire said from inside the cabin, her voice shaking but defiant. "She'll never be yours. I'd die first." "That can be arranged," the gunman said, pressing his weapon harder against Claire's head. Daniel forced himself to stay calm, to think. 2 men plus Thomas. The gunman in the cabin had Claire. Thomas had the baby. There was probably a third man somewhere, maybe the one who'd set the barn fire. 3 against 1, with hostages in play. Bad odds. Maybe impossible odds. But Daniel had faced impossible odds before. "What do you want, Thomas? What's your endgame here?" "I want what's mine. I want my wife back in Helena where she belongs. I want this baby who'll bear my name and learn to call me father. And I want you dead, Wyatt. I want you to die knowing you failed, that everything you fought for was for nothing. And if I agree, if I let Claire go with you, will you let the baby live? Will you promise not to hurt them?" "Daniel, no!" Claire's voice was anguished. "Don't you dare!" "Will you?" Daniel pressed, ignoring Claire's protests. "Your word, Thomas.
Promise me you won't hurt them, and I'll let you take them. I won't fight. I'll just let you win." Thomas studied him, suspicion and triumph warring in his expression. "You'd do that? Give up everything? For them?" Yes. It was a lie. Daniel had no intention of letting Thomas Brennan walk away with Claire and baby Margaret, but he needed Thomas to think he'd won, needed him to lower his guard for just a moment, needed the opening he could use to end this. "All right," Thomas said slowly. "I give you my word. I won't hurt them if you don't fight." "Thomas, don't trust him," the gunman started, but Thomas waved him off. "It doesn't matter. Even if he's lying, he can't win. Not against three of us. Not with the women as hostages." Thomas looked back at Daniel. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop your weapons. All of them. Gun, knife, anything else you're carrying. Then you're going to walk into this cabin, nice and slow, and my man here is going to tie you up. Once you're secured, we'll take Claire and the baby and leave. Simple." "And then what? You just let me die in the fire when it spreads to the cabin?" Thomas shrugged. "I suppose that's for God to decide. Now, drop the weapons. Last chance." Daniel unbuckled his gun belt, let it fall, pulled the knife from his boot, tossed it aside, raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "All right, I'm unarmed. Let me see Claire. Let me say goodbye." "Come ahead." Slowly. Daniel walked toward the cabin, each step measured and careful. Behind him, he could hear the barn collapsing, the crash of falling timbers and the screams of his dying horses. Everything he'd built over 20 years. His home, his livelihood, his sanctuary, going up in flames. But he didn't care. Buildings could be rebuilt. Horses could be replaced. Claire and Margaret couldn't. He was 10 feet from the cabin door when he saw it. The slight relaxation in Thomas's grip on the baby, the way his attention shifted to something behind Daniel. It was the opening Daniel had been waiting for. He lunged forward, faster than a man his age should be able to move, years of war and survival instinct taking over. His hands closed around Thomas's wrist, twisting, forcing him to release the baby. Margaret fell, and Daniel caught her with one arm while using the other to drive his fist into Thomas's throat. Thomas staggered back, gagging, and the gunman inside spun toward the door, his weapon swinging toward Daniel. But Claire was already moving, had been waiting for her own opening. She grabbed the gun barrel, shoving it up just as it fired, the bullet punching through the cabin roof instead of through Daniel's chest. Daniel handed the screaming baby to Claire, then turned back to Thomas, who was recovering, reaching for his own pistol. They grappled in the doorway, both fighting for control of the weapon. It fired once, twice, the shots going wild. Then Daniel got his hand on Thomas's wrist, slammed it against the doorframe until the gun fell free. "It's over," Daniel growled, driving Thomas back against the cabin wall. "You lost. Accept it." "Never." Thomas's face was purple with rage and lack of air from the throat punch. "She's mine. She'll always be mine. I'll never let her." The third shot came from inside the cabin. Daniel spun to see Claire standing there, the gunman's weapon in her shaking hands, smoke curling from the barrel. The hired gunman was on the floor, blood spreading from a wound in his chest. "I said I'd never go back," Claire said, her voice eerily calm despite the tears streaming down her face. "I meant it." Thomas used Daniel's distraction to break free, stumbling toward the horses tied near the burning barn. Daniel chased him, but Thomas was already mounted, kicking his horse into a run. For a moment, Daniel thought about letting him go, about just being glad it was over. Then he saw Thomas pull a rifle from his saddle scabbard, saw him turn the horse back toward the cabin, toward where Claire stood holding their daughter. Daniel didn't think. He just moved, putting himself between Thomas and the cabin door, spreading his arms wide to make himself the biggest target possible. "Run!" he shouted to Claire. "Take Margaret and run!" Thomas fired. The bullet took Daniel in the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to his knees. Through a haze of pain, Daniel saw Thomas cock the rifle again, saw him aim for the cabin, for Claire. Then Eleanor Marsh stepped out from behind what was left of the barn, a shotgun in her hands. She must have followed the smoke from town, must have arrived just moments ago. She fired both barrels, and Thomas Brennan fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The world went strange after that, edges blurring, sounds becoming distant.
Daniel was aware of Claire kneeling beside him, of her hands pressing against his bleeding shoulder, of her voice begging him to stay awake, to hold on, to not leave her. Not leaving, he managed to say. Can't get rid of me. That easy. You better not die on me, Daniel Wyatt. You promised me a life together. You promised. Keep my promises. Then Tom Morrison was there, and other men from town, and someone was lifting Daniel, carrying him. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was Claire's face above his, the baby in her arms, both of them safe, both of them alive. He'd kept his promise after all. Daniel woke 3 days later in a bed in Gardner's small doctor's office. The first thing he saw was Claire, asleep in a chair beside his bed, baby Margaret in a basket at her feet. Both were safe. Both were whole. The doctor explained that the bullet had gone clean through, missing bone and major blood vessels by inches. Daniel would recover fully, given time and rest. He'd been lucky. Looking at Claire and Margaret, Daniel thought luck had nothing to do with it. Sometimes, against all odds, people who deserved happiness actually got it. Sometimes spring really did come, even after the longest winter. 2 months later, on a warm July morning, Daniel and Claire stood in front of Judge Harrison in Gardner's temporary courthouse, Tom Morrison's saloon, pressed into service while a new building was constructed. Eleanor Marsh served as witness while Tom gave Claire away, both of them grinning like proud parents. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Harrison said, his stern face softening into an actual smile. Mr. Wyatt, you may kiss your bride. Daniel did, thoroughly and without embarrassment, while the assembled crowd cheered. When they broke apart, both breathless and laughing, he whispered against her lips, "You sure about this? It's not too late to run." "Too late," Claire whispered back, echoing the words that had become their private joke, their shared truth. "Way too late." They rebuilt the barn together that summer, working side by side in the long evenings while Margaret slept in a basket under the cottonwood tree. New horses came to fill the empty stalls, not replacements for the ones he'd lost, but new beginnings, like everything else in their lives now. Claire's belly grew round again by autumn, this time with Daniel's child. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the mountains turn gold and red with changing leaves, and Daniel would rest his hand on her stomach and feel his son or daughter kick against his palm. "Happy?" he'd ask, because he needed to hear it. Needed to know she didn't regret choosing this life, choosing him. "Deliriously," she'd answer, "more than I knew was possible." Word filtered back occasionally about what had happened to Thomas Brennan's empire. His business partner had taken over the freight company, paid off the debts Thomas had hidden, restored its reputation. The house in Helena sold to a banker and his family. It was as if Thomas had never existed, except in the memories of those he'd hurt. The court eventually reconstructed the divorce records from witness testimony and Eleanor's copies, making everything legal and official once more. Not that it mattered much to Daniel and Claire. They'd been married in their hearts long before any judge said the words. Sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell soft outside their cabin windows, Claire would wake from nightmares of Thomas, of being trapped again, of losing everything they'd built. Daniel would hold her, remind her it was over, promise her she was safe. "You don't have to love me," she'd say sometimes, testing their old words, needing to hear his response. "Too late," he'd always answer. And it was true. Way too late to do anything but love her with everything he had, with everything he was. On Margaret's first birthday, they gathered their small family, Eleanor, Tom, Mrs. Henderson, Jim Parker, who'd ridden all the way from Virginia City, and celebrated with cake and songs and the kind of laughter that only comes from surviving something terrible and coming out stronger on the other side. Daniel watched Claire blowing out candles with Margaret on her lap, watched the joy on her face, the freedom in her movements, the way she laughed without fear or hesitation. This was what they'd fought for, this moment, and all the moments like it that would come after. "What are you thinking?" Claire asked later, after their guests had left and they were cleaning up. "I'm thinking about the night I found you in the snow. How I almost didn't go out in that storm. How different everything would be if I'd stayed home. But you didn't stay home." "No, I didn't." He pulled her close, tucked her against his chest.
You know what I said to myself that night when I saw you lying there half buried? What? I said, you don't get to die in my house, like I had any say in it, like my wanting you to live made a difference. Maybe it did. Maybe that's all it takes sometimes, someone believing you deserve to live. You've always deserved to live, Claire. You just finally got the chance to do it. She turned in his arms, looked up at him with those dark eyes that had seen so much pain but chose to see hope instead. We got the chance, both of us. We saved each other, Daniel. Yeah, he said softly. I suppose we did. Outside, spring was returning to Montana, the third spring since Claire had stumbled into his life and changed everything. The snow was melting, green was pushing through brown earth, and the world was being reborn once again. Inside the cabin, two people who'd survived winter's worst held each other and planned for summer. For gardens to plant and fences to mend and children to raise, for all the ordinary beautiful days that stretched ahead of them like a promise fulfilled. You know what the best part is? Claire asked. What's that? No more running, no more hiding, no more being afraid, just living, finally, actually living. Sounds perfect to me. Me too. They stood there in their small cabin, holding each other while their daughter played at their feet and the world turned toward spring, and Daniel thought about how strange life was. How you could be alone for years, convinced that was your fate, and then one blizzard, one desperate woman, one choice to help instead of look away, could change everything. He told Claire once that some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. He'd been right, but he hadn't understood the full truth of it then. It wasn't just that some things were worth fighting for. It was that fighting for them, standing up, refusing to back down, choosing love over fear, that's what made you alive, really alive, not just surviving. You don't have to love me, Claire whispered against his chest. Their ritual, their joke, their truth. Too late, Daniel whispered back. And it was. Way too late for anything except this. The life they'd built together, the love they'd fought for, the spring that finally came after winter's long siege. Outside, the first birds were singing, welcoming the new season. Inside, a family that had been forged in fire and ice and determination held each other close and let themselves believe in tomorrow. Because sometimes, against all odds and all logic, sometimes broken people found each other in the snow. Sometimes they fought for each other and won. Sometimes spring really did come, even to those who'd lived through the coldest, darkest winters. And sometimes, just sometimes, love was exactly as simple and complicated as two people looking at each other and saying, too late. Too late to run. Too late to hide. Too late to do anything except stand together and face whatever came next. Together. Always together. The way it was meant to be from that very first moment in the snow, when a dying woman and a lonely man found each other and decided to live.